If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
And we are back. I'm Chris Evan, the CEO of Survival Dispatch, joined tonight by my good friend Randy Nance, back home in Texas, combat wounded Green Beret. Below him, our in-house CIA operative, Jeff MD, also author extraordinaire. He's got more than just the 2 books behind him, by the way, and he has more coming. And he's CIA, so clearly he's friends with everybody in Hollywood, so potential movie coming out of one of
Yeah, I don't think so.
And regardless of what our hater in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada says, Jeff is our 007. Beside him is our 008, Khalid Mohammed from Command 11 Intel out of Pakistan, but also American as well. Spent the better part of his youth growing up here in America. So we're going to be joined by Mike Glover in the second half tonight. We're doing the first half with Jeff and Randy. And just kick things off, we're going to be discussing some updates on terrorist news, some stuff that Khalid told me we need to cover it because it's important. So what we'll do is the main topic, the hour of terror that we're calling it, basically a simulation roundtable discussion of the first wave of terrorist attacks on America. We've put out hour by hour by hour plans basically based on the intel that Khalid's gathered. And that conversation will be with Mike Glover. So before we jump in and get started on that, we're going to do the conflicted question here. For those of you not familiar, conflictedthegame.com. These are questions that are posed in a post-apocalyptic scenario. I think there's 14 card decks, by the way. And there's always an element of morality to them, hence the name Conflicted. A local law enforcement officer wants to join your group after the collapse. Holy crap, Khalid, is this our stalker by chance?
It's got to be. When I read the conflicted question, I was like, this has got to be our stalker.
Yeah.
Didn't you pick this? We can address it now.
Yeah, we'll tell the story at a future point in time. But all right, we'll start this over. A local law enforcement officer wants to join your group after the collapse. Actually, hold on a second. So our private signal chat, which anybody who joins as a paying guardian on our Substack or Patreon gets access to, they know everything about this. So I guarantee you there are people in the audience, our guardians, that are laughing about this right now because we've shared all the details with them. All right, third time's the charm. A local law enforcement officer wants to join your group after the collapse. He is infamous in your community for serving his own kind of justice, and he is very unlikable and untrustworthy. He threatens to label your group a terrorist cell and expose you and your group if he is denied admission. Would you allow him to join your group knowing he will try to take it over, or would you take your chances with his threat? Debate your choice with your team members. So we're going to give you, Khalid, Mike Glover, and I will give you our answers at the end of tonight. We want to see y'all's answers in the live chat or the comment section down below. And let's jump into the very first news item tonight. So as Khalid posed in this one, is the frequency of the incidents not starting to make you wonder what is really happening? So this was last night. A car just rammed into a veterinarian office in Wilmington, North Carolina, and a large explosion followed. Large response underway now. Of course, this was last night. 41-second video. I'm going to play the whole thing, then I'll go to Khalid first.
Oh, my God. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. Oh my God.
So I think that's enough to get the picture. So Khalid, explain what's going on with all these crazy incidences these days.
All right. Here's what we don't understand. I mean, after this happened yesterday, the story came out that this guy was a disabled driver and he hit a gas line and it blew up the building. Now, if you remember back about 4 or 5 months ago in Boston, there was a Penske truck that was barreling down the road and flipped over about 1.5 miles away from Tufts Medical Center. They said the same thing about him, that he had a medical issue and that was why. I was having a conversation earlier with a friend of mine who is in U.S. intelligence, and he said, you know, there is an active effort to not brand anything terrorism. And if you look at it, Palm Springs, Idaho, the suspicious package yesterday in New York City, the number of active shooters that you've seen, the word terrorism isn't used anymore. It's just brushed under the carpet very quickly. And it's not discussed. It's almost, we're coming to an idea that there is something actively going on to hide what's happening. Because things that happen, I'll take, for example, Palm Springs. Palm Springs, you attacked a fertility center with a car bomb. When the fertility center was closed, there was nobody there. And there was a tier 1 medical center 1.5 miles away. And
in the zone.
The accomplice was caught in Poland, extradited back to the US, and nothing was said about him after that.
Memory hold.
Now, how is that possible that these things are happening and no one's talking about them?
Well, I don't know, but that's actually a question I have for Jeff. It's in the show notes as well. But Jeff, are there any historical precedents for the pattern that Khalid is describing, where essentially the bad guys are doing these probing attacks to measure response times, SOPs, and all that stuff?
You know, in the context of terrorists, no, not that I know. Let me just say, I'm not aware of it. There
Fair
are,
enough.
that there's a lot I'm not aware of. Just ask my wife. But there are cases where attacks were hushed up. One example were the balloon bombs that the Japanese launched in World War II and were trying to set fire to the Pacific Northwest. And they were dropping high explosives, and that generally was not talked about specifically under the orders of the Pentagon, because they didn't want to create panic. And it really wasn't much of a threat. I think there was one kid killed by one, but it was like years after the war. He found a bomb in the woods and got blown up in like the 1960s or something. But yeah, there's times where they'll hush stuff up because they don't want to create panic. Like how many Americans realize that the Japanese shelled San Diego? How many people know that? Not very many.
I didn't know.
They shelled San Diego they had a submarine off the coast surface, and they lobbed shells at an oil storage facility in San Diego. Nobody knows about it because it was hushed up, because they didn't want to create panic and they don't want to give other people ideas. And the main thing is they didn't want to give basically bomb damage assessment for free to the Japanese by putting it out on the radio. But there's a lot of times when they do that, and it's not necessarily for a nefarious reason. You know, you may disagree with them, but they're doing it because they don't want to have panic. They don't want to provide the enemy with any updates or any information or say, wow, they really caught us by surprise with that tactic. Yeah, you don't want to give them any more ideas.
That makes total sense. I did not know about San Diego. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I was actually had the privilege of being in town in San Diego for work when the Midway was opened, the weekend that it was open for public tours. And it was pretty amazing. You're standing there looking at this World War II aircraft carrier. Then if you look at the scale of it compared to the Nimitz class aircraft carriers, it looks like a life raft. I mean, but in reality, it's pretty big. So Randy, moving to you next. Is there anything that and I'm not discounting Khalid at all. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that there's probably an element, a certain percentage of these things are definitely probing on the part of like AQ and ISIS and whatnot. But is there anything that you feel indicates that these are potentially coordinated probing incidents / attacks?
Well, it's if we were doing something similar in another country, if we were doing operations, that's exactly what we would be doing. And in fact, not just us, but you talk about when we were both in Afghanistan, Iraq, all our troops saw this as they got smarter and tried new tactics. This is exactly what they did. There's another point I wanted to make, because I think it's kind of weird, right? how many accidents? I'm trying to think. How many accidents have hit main gas lines and blown up over like a long time? I can't think of when it's happened before. But ironically, now we have 2 accidents. And some people are saying this drunk and he ran off. Well, but if a drunk hit a gas main and it blew up, he did not run off. No. However, wasn't it last year that plane that crashed in Philadelphia just happened to beeline a gas main line? Isn't that kind of weird? I think it is.
Good point.
I don't know if there's anything to it. I'm just thinking it's ironic that 2 in the last couple of years have hit gas lines directly to where they blew up when we never saw that before.
Now, I lived in Pennsylvania, and I hate to say this, houses were blowing up from gas leaks about every 2 weeks. I swear to God. And it's because old infrastructure. Pipes leak, masses in someone's basement, someone flips on a light, boom. These old towns in Pennsylvania, that crap, and in Pittsburgh too, shit happens.
Well, where was this crash? Where was this at? This veterinarian's office?
North Carolina, I believe.
North Carolina, yeah.
But the thing is, all because it looks like an accident doesn't mean it is. I mean, the ideal probe would be the one they don't know is a probe.
Yeah,
but also, if someone said, you just take advantage of an accident and say, okay, there's an accident. Let's see how long did it take to respond? How many units showed up? Where was the fire department? Where were the police? Because they don't know what it is until they get there.
That's exactly why I put that comment up on screen. Of course, we're aggregating 9 different platforms of comments here, so it's already scrolled off my screen. But I did want to give that person credit, absolutely. So moving on to the next one, Khalid. And there's a short video goes with this. Pardon me. Perhaps the U.S. government is helping these terrorists turn their dream, the conquest of the White House, into reality, and still sends weekly funds to Taliban without fully stopping it. According to this arrogant young Taliban member who celebrates their 4th anniversary of victory with full arrogance and other key Taliban figures, the White House belongs to Islam, and one day they will conquer it and raise the Taliban flag there. Note, I also believe that if the Taliban maintain territorial control, unite dozens of terrorist groups from around the world, and at the same time receive weekly financial and intelligence support from the Donald Trump administration and CIA, this would not just be a dream, but a very achievable goal for the Taliban and their allied terrorists. So let's watch this 28 seconds. Khalid's probably the only one who's going to understand it. So actually, let me back it up because I know this is going to be an eye test, and I got a better way of doing this. So White House belongs to Islam. I swear to God that America failed. I swear to God that America will fail to defeat the White House. The White House belongs to our Islamic white flag, the Taliban flag. The Muslim Ummah has only this Islamic flag, and we will soon raise this flag over the White House, and we will humble and disgrace Americans 100%, and inshallah, that day will come. And I think that's the end of it. So
is that the White House or the Capitol building that we're looking at?
That's the Capitol building.
That's
That's the intelligence that you're talking about with the Taliban. They don't know the difference between the White House and the Capitol building.
Well, thank you, because I was I was fixing to point that out as well. And I don't have a lot to add to this other than we'll go same order we did last time, other than to say I saw a post a couple years ago on X from this black guy. He's very witty, super intelligent. He made this post. He said, y'all need to lay off the white guys. Do you not realize that they started 2 world wars, ended 2 world wars, and they're the worst sons of bitches you could ever mess with? Leave the white guys alone. So anyway, Khalid, give me your thoughts on this. I mean, let me one more thing. I was told by a couple friends who served in Afghanistan that at the time, going back 15, 20 years ago, there was next to no external news coming into the country. So it was strictly what the bad guys wanted everybody to see. It was dead tree format, meaning paper. And they programmed a bunch of people, kind of like Americans are programmed by legacy media here. But I'll let you pick that up from there.
Well, if Afghanistan now has 4 newspapers that are run by the Taliban, their propaganda outfits. They have an Irani-sponsored newspaper that runs in Afghanistan as well. Well, sorry, covers Afghanistan news, but is published from Tehran. what we saw, and this is something that this is only one of the videos. They on their 4th anniversary, which was I think about 2 or 3 days ago, they made a stuffed dummy of Donald Trump and dragged him through the streets of Kabul. You had 2 videos issued by Taliban members flat out saying they were going to attack the US and they were going to teach the Americans a lesson. The sheer amount of arrogance that exists in the Taliban right now, because again, the Americans are paying them and they know that they're pulling the wool over the Americans' eyes and they're still getting paid for it. And until that stops, look, I am of the belief that if you were to take the money you're giving the Taliban and put spec op teams into Afghanistan to take out top leadership, this would all end. The problem in Afghanistan would come to an end. Instead of paying the enemy, let's send soldiers in and let's clean this up, because it can't be fixed without that.
Before we move on, Khalid, I had a super busy day. Did I catch that we sent spec ops guys into Syria and took out an ISIS or AQ guy in the past 24 hours?
Yeah.
Yep, so more of that, right? Let's do
more of that, because look, you got drone strikes you can use. You have spec ops you can use. The arsenal that America has to be able to carry out attacks on Afghanistan is very huge. But to let them continue to operate like this, the arrogance will continue to grow, and their boldness and their belief that they can conquer America will get stronger and stronger.
No, I appreciate that. So, Jeff, I'm just curious. You served in Afghanistan pretty early on. How seriously should we take these threats from these guys?
Well, I mean, they're serious in that they mean to do it. Do they have the capability? Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're going to take over the country, but they can sure as hell do some damage.
Yeah.
And you talk about 4 newspapers, but I think people need to realize, and it may have changed since I was there, but the vast majority of Afghanis were illiterate.
Yeah.
So a newspaper doesn't mean squat.
It's like 85%, isn't it, Jeff?
And then they speak multiple different languages. You know, they speak Dari, they speak Pashto. There's just all these different groups there, and they speak Farsi in the West and everything else. So they get most of their information by television, radio, or word of mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I appreciate
that. So that makes it real easy to control the narrative. Because no one's going to pick up a newspaper and say, "Wait, he's lying to us," because it says here. No, there aren't that many newspapers, and most people can't read them anyway.
Yep.
So, Randy, just for the benefit of anybody who's in our audience who doesn't have this information, I'd like you to touch on the capabilities that the Taliban now possesses that they didn't have before the Biden administration's crazy withdrawal. And as a Green Beret, I want to ask you something. When you were out on a recce or something like that, if you saw somebody with full NVG, what was your reaction? What did you interpret that to be?
Well, I didn't have to, because they didn't have it.
Right. So if you saw that, it was one of our guys.
Today, yes. Now, with the picture of the guys you showed, we've shown several times that Khalid sent us of those guys that I compared to special operations guys, because they just are. Not even, to say that, yes, it could be conventional forces, but to me, that looks like special operations. But you look at, there was no soldier like that when I was there and previous to any of this time. They shot with guns all over the place, AKs. They didn't have trigger discipline with their finger and all the stuff you see. But if I saw the silhouette of those guys in the middle of the night right now, and I was in Afghanistan, now I would probably take a second look, but traditionally, you're right. If I saw that silhouette, I knew they were us. I wouldn't even give them a second look or a thought, because the enemy did not dress like that.
So I don't want to start any religious wars or anything here, but years ago when I got my first Kalashnikov, which, by the way, everything I have now are ARs for a very specific reason, but a buddy of mine who's super hardcore AR anti-AK says, that's great if you want to hit everything around your target. So, anyway, that ought to stir up some of the AK lovers out there. So moving on to the next one here. 30 alleged Trend Aragua gang members, including suspected leaders, indicted in Colorado for federal crimes such as drug trafficking, firearms offenses, and murder for hire plots. 2 wanted TDA members from Denver were apprehended in Colombia. It's 2 minutes, 26 seconds. I'll probably play around half of it so you get the gist of it.
A multi-agency operation there in Colorado where 30 alleged leaders, members, and associates of Tren de Aragua are being charged now with drug trafficking, firearms trafficking, and even murder for hire plots. So here's what we know here. In this operation, it began roughly 10 months ago is when they started planning this. Agents seized 69 firearms. At least one was equipped with a machine gun conversion device, according to the ATF. Drugs including fentanyl, pink cocaine, and methamphetamine were also seized in the operation. One defendant, a Venezuelan national, allegedly bragged to undercover officers that the same people carrying out crimes and viral videos from Colorado apartment complexes were the ones that he planned to use in murder for hire plots. Federal officials described the brutal and brazen way they operate. Take a listen.
During this investigation, the ATF undercover agents met individuals that compared murder to playing games, such as golf. These same individuals described to our undercover agents that not only would they commit murder, but they would bring heads of their victims back for additional compensation. Based on these undercover contacts, our ATF special response, based on those undercover contacts, our ATF special response team, again with the support of the Denver Homeland Security Task Force, conducted several high-risk operations and multiple search and arrest warrants.
So, Khalid, can you explain what the significance is as far as terrorism is concerned? Like why you asked me to put that in the brief?
There's a couple things. If you look at the cartels, I mean, I think it was yesterday I saw a video. The cartels now have drones, and they're learning how to operate drones and use them for recon and use them to drop explosives from the air. That's something that came from the Taliban and Afghanistan. The problem we've got right now is that you have now created a facilitation system. The Taliban is supplying the cartels. The cartels are smuggling those weapons into the U.S., supplying the cartels and supplying the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic ISIS. So what you have is all those U.S. weapons that were sitting in Afghanistan have now ended up back in the U.S. and in the bad guys' hands, the bad actors' hands. What does that mean when it comes to terrorism? Your police force doesn't have that weaponry. And they are going to be very overmatched when it comes to fighting these guys on the streets.
What was where was the California one where you had the guys all decked out in level 4
I think that
body?
was Hollywood, the town, not the movie.
Yeah, but it went on for like an hour or two or something because the cops had Glock 19s and these guys had everything.
One of those guys was Ukrainian too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that does ring a bell. So actually, Jeff, what are the connections between TDA and radical Islamic terrorist groups?
Well, I don't know the specifics of it, but there are a lot of primarily Lebanese-based groups in northern South America, in Venezuela, Colombia, that area. And they started decades ago as legitimate business connections, because the thing about Lebanon, they don't have oil, they don't have anything. What they did have was business, and they were very good at trading, and that's been going on for thousands of years in that part of the world. That's their claim to fame. They were the Phoenicians back in the days, and so they just naturally expanded. Well, Hezbollah, all those other groups kind of piggybacked on that, and so they established themselves in Caracas and then Bogota and all those, and they've got a very good business communities down there. They all are, of course, fluent in Spanish and also speaking Arabic, but they're self-funding in that way, in that they've got a lot of business to piggyback on. And you can do legitimate business, and you can use the same infrastructure to do not so legitimate business. So there was a lot of drug shipments, a lot of heroin stuff used to go that way. Because you got to remember, back in the day, Lebanon was one of the major transshipment points for heroin. It was Lebanon and Sicily.
Yeah, appreciate that insight. So, Randy, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how TDA is different than other transnational gangs that have operated in America before?
Well, apparently they're getting a lot of money, like a lot of money. You think about it, and I'll go back to the same thing. All of these terrorists and the criminals, it doesn't matter which ones we bring up at this point. Even the cartels, they've all elevated their game, we'll say, to speak, right? They have better tactics now. They definitely have better planning, and those two things right there are one of the things that we've done the best. How do we go do what we do? Not only do we own the night, but we're the best at planning and strategy. And so when you take those, again, it's just like sports or anywhere else, you can apply it to anywhere. So where we're watching now is the criminal element that were already professional criminals are now also becoming professional terrorists or, some kind of super professional criminal because they have, I would say, military and intelligence tactics training.
The thing that strikes me the most about TDA is how opportunistic they are. So we had Victor Avila on several times on our podcast. For those of you who don't remember, when Fast and Furious went down and there were 2 ICE agents shot up on the highway of death in Mexico, Agent Zapata and Victor Avila, and Agent Zapata died in Victor's arms. Victor was the first person who brought up TDA on our podcast almost 2 years ago. And he said the big difference between TDA and all the other gangs is they're loyal to nobody but the almighty dollar, and they're very opportunistic. So if the cartels want them to smuggle children for child sex trafficking, where everybody makes a lot more money because they abuse these kids, they send them to 15, 20 different Johns a day sort of thing. The numbers are astronomical. JJ Carroll did the numbers. I can't recall exactly what they are, but I want to say that a lot of the children who are trafficked, it's like $500,000 over 3 years. And at that point in time, they're useless. They commit suicide or the gangs kill them. But they would then turn around and go and run drugs for another company. They would be, or cartel, just pretty much any criminal activity you can imagine. Basically, guns for hire is the way Victor described them. I think we've seen that over the course of the past couple of years. So Khalid, next one up, goes a little bit deeper on the Afghanistan pullout and how we armed them. And I'll read through this, but I'd like you to kind of tie it together where Randy started it, as far as the enemy of my enemy is a friend of mine, and how they've all coalesced together in Afghanistan. It's now the terrorist capital of the world, and all of our enemies are collaborating together. They're training each other. They're equipping each other. It just, I can't say what's on top of my mind as far as Obama and Biden are concerned. Otherwise, our what do we call them now, by the way, Cleet? Our secret, what is it? Like, we've got our secret fan, I guess you could call
secret buddy.
Yeah, secret buddy, something like that. Okay, the incompetence of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris for arming the terrorists with U.S. weapons will never be forgiven. The Biden-Harris installation is a blight on U.S. history and will always be remembered as the administration that surrendered American superiority to terrorism and extremism, both in the U.S. and abroad. Today, sanctuary cities, arrogant liberals, gender-confused individuals, and absolute collapse of American society can be traced back to this installation and their puppet master, Barack Obama. They operate as an extension of the evil they've installed in foreign lands, with many of their representatives actively involved in disturbances in the U.S. Indictments and jail cells are not enough. President Trump, there must be an absolute cleanse of the American system, starting from Obama appointees. Every member of state and federal administrations must be fully investigated for violations of their oaths and the Constitution of the United States. So I'll let you pick it up there, Khalid.
If you look at that picture that's attached to the tweet there, look at the weaponry that the terrorists have now. I mean, you are talking about literally a fully armed U.S. Attack system. That rifle there has a night vision scope on it. The weaponry is all U.S. now, and this is what we're fighting in Pakistan. The fact that we're dealing with all of this right now means that it's already reached the U.S. because they've been trained on these weapons. The AK-47 exists, but exists for those junior level fighters that are not going to be the expendable ones. Let's put it that way. The expendable fighter is given the AK. And the guy that is given proper military training is given U.S. weaponry. He's turned into a sniper. He's turned into a proper warrior. The problem that I have is that Biden and his absolute stupidity in how he pulled out gave the U.S. weaponry to them and just left it. And all of that weaponry is now going to be used against Americans and Europeans in their own countries. So for me, the problem is if you pick up from where Randy was, in 2001, when the U.S. first invaded Afghanistan, you had a bunch of, misshot gunners that would aim for a target and shoot around the target. Now you have properly trained snipers that can sit far away, get you into location, correct for wind, correct for distance, and take a guy out. And you've given them night vision, you've given them thermal, the things that they would have never dreamed of having before, they now have. So the concept of warfare with the terrorists has completely changed. And if you look at the way Syria is operating right now with Giuliani's government, look at the weaponry they're carrying. That's also U.S. weapons.
So a couple things stand out to me before we go to Jeff here in this picture. Obviously, the night optic. I don't know if that's IR or thermal, but it's probably at least one of the two. A couple other things that are really hard to see, and I had to download this picture and zoom in on it with enhanced AI. That's a Harris radio there. Harris radios cost our military somewhere between $18,000 and $20,000, depending on the model. They're illegal for Americans to own. Not only do they have the highest level of encryption available, they channel hop up to 100 times per second, which is also illegal for Americans. So we can buy radios. I have some Motorola's behind me that are business class. And I want to say that the maximum number of channel hops per second is 6 channels. So even if somebody were to compromise the encryption, when you're changing upwards of 100 channels per second, unless you have the math, the algorithm to follow that, pretty hard to understand what they're saying or zoom in on it. The other thing that catches my eye here, and Randy can probably speak to this as well, those rounds on the right-hand side there, those are M855 A1 rounds. So they're not the typical M855 that you're used to buying at the local store with a green tip. They are 62 grains. They are a penetrator, but they're completely different construction. So they're hardened steel with a copper jacket versus the 62 grain M855 green tip. It is not anywhere near the league of what that is. It's illegal for Americans to possess that type of ammunition there.
Well, even the tip of it, like everybody knows what the green tip look, it just comes to a point. These, if you look at it, is almost like a tiny little hollow point on the tip of that round.
Correct. Here's the other thing too, is that, I mean, we've got 3 different chronographs. We've done a boatload of testing on different rounds, suppressors, you name it. Typically, the 62 grain consumer round, 2,800, 2,900 feet per second at the muzzle. I have not had a chance to get my hands on the A1, but it's rated for something like 3,150 feet per second. So speed kills, especially when it comes to armor penetration. Yeah. So, Jeff, I'd like to get you to expand a little bit on just how big of this jump in technology is from what the terrorists had to what we gave them. It's a gulf, but I just appreciate if you kind of put it in words that our audience can grasp.
Yeah, it is.
How extreme it is.
It is. It is huge. It's basically the difference between a Sherman tank and an Abrams tank. I mean, the AK-47 was designed in 1947, hence the name AK-47. It's old technology. It's Gen 1 assault rifle. The only one really older than it is the Sturmgewehr that the Nazis, had in the Sturmgewehr 44, and it only predates it by 3 years. Then we went to the M14. That was our response to it. It was a little bit better. And then there's the M16, and then there's the Fall, and there's the G3 that the Germans put out. And everybody goes, and they all had almost everything shot except the Russian stuff. They all shot the same round. They shot the 7.62, the old 30-06 round, the M1 Garand round. They changed that around a little bit over the years, but it's basically the same thing. So but they've gone to, it's a better platform. The round, the bullet itself is not that much different, but it's the system, the sights, it's just a lot better. It's like the difference between using iron sights and a scope. Huge difference in performance.
That's a good comparison. Absolutely. Randy, I mean, you were spec ops. Speak a little bit more, just having the ability of having, a night optic on your gun. And if you want to go any further with the M85A1, go ahead, because again, I don't know anybody who's fired that round except for guys like you.
Well, so, looking at all that stuff, as Jeff and Khalid both point out, I mean, they have come along echelons, right? This is, night and day difference in what capability they used to have now to compose to what they have, to the equipment they have. Heck, even all that equipment, shoot, when I was in, when we would bring in the bad guy, of course they held AK-47s, but most of them were like what Khalid talked about. These guys only had one magazine, and that thing might not even be full itself, and that is it. Now they may be able to run to another street or another block or whatever, to another cache, and pick up another weapon or another magazine, but they didn't have anything like what you just saw laid out on that little blanket there, or whatever that was. And they had all Russian equipment, right? So it's my firm belief that there is nothing Russian that's any good. It's all shitty equipment. It doesn't work. We smoked every bit of it. I mean, we had Bradley's smoking tanks. I mean, so now, instead of them having all that really crappy old antiquated equipment, they now have all upgrade equipment, the same stuff that we have. And we haven't even mentioned Ukraine, because everybody knows all the weapon systems from everything did not all go to Ukraine. We don't know where all that stuff is. And then they were selling it on the black market. Who do you think's buying it off the black market? All the Taliban and everybody else. So now all we've done is equipment wise, we put them on a level playing field with our own soldiers, which did not exist before this time right now.
A couple quick comments, and I'm going to come back to Jeff on something specific that Mike Sterling's discussed in the past. But number one, if you look at the propaganda videos from the Sinaloa cartel and other cartels that are several years old, the one thing that stands out to me is every single one of them has a different weapons platform. There's a reason that we lost Jeff. So, there's a reason that our military and our NATO partners have settled on the same stuff, because if you're on the battlefield, you can easily, hey, Jeff, I was just saying that one of the advantages that we have is with our soldiers all being armed with the same stuff, NATO standards, you can pick up magazines, ammo on the battlefield. So if you go back several years, again, you look at Sinaloa cartel, you look at propaganda videos, all of them have different weapons platforms. That's not an efficient way. And especially, they say the average firefight is like 7 minutes that a squad gets in. And you're not going 7 minutes with one magazine or 3 magazines, sort of thing, not to be dangerous. The other thing, I wanted to come to you, Jeff. Mike Sterling said that multiple times in the past, you commented on it, that they're very good at building something that works once.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, that's not the case. But he also, actually, it may have been you that made a comment on how in a communist country, especially the way the USSR was, that the people on the front lines, like the people in charge of all the equipment, would say, yeah, everything's working fine, so that they would get promotions. Maybe explain the culture of that, because Mike Sterling, correct me if I'm wrong, did he not say some of these warheads or missiles that the warheads were on were filled with water instead of gasoline?
Yeah, I mean, because nobody wants to give bad news. And that's one of the reasons we had so grossly overestimated the strength and power of the Soviet economy. Is we would intercept their reports. We had spies that would give us their annual reports and production numbers. And we thought that they were telling themselves the truth. Well, they were lying to Moscow, because if they didn't hit their production goals, they'd get in trouble. So they said,
which means they got whacked.
Yes. Absolutely, we hit our goals, 100%. And the same thing happened in Iraq with Saddam and a lot of the weapons of mass destruction. There were lots of reports from Iraqi scientists to Baghdad saying, yeah, we're real close, man. We're going to have that nuclear weapon real soon. Because they knew if they told him the truth, he'd line them up against the wall and shoot them.
Yeah.
So if you lie, you're at least going to live a little while longer. But the Russians are they can design some good stuff. You know, if you look at the AN-94, which was the follow-on to the AK-74, and I actually saw one in Afghanistan. There were some Uzbek Spetsnaz guys who had it, and they were General Dostum's bodyguards.
Yeah.
And it was a good weapons platform. And I think some of our Green Beret guys shot their guns, and then they shot our guns, you know, just to see. They go, you know, that's a good little gun. But they can't mass produce them. They only made a handful. And that's typical of, I hate to say it's typical of the Russians. You know, they can make the MiG-25 Foxback and go 3.5 Mach. But then when you land, you got to replace the engines because they burn them up. They're just not good at mass production. And they never have it. Now, they could do crude stuff. They could make a ton of AK-47s. They made a ton of T-34 tanks. But if the more sophisticated the weapon system, they can't make it.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. And I've got one more question on this for you, Khalid. So you've tracked through your sources a bunch of the equipment we left behind in Afghanistan coming to Central America, Mexico, and back into America. I'd like you to touch on that, but also, and I've mentioned this a couple times on our podcast, but I have a friend whose father-in-law was the former Minister of Defense in Pakistan, and they were over there visiting. Khalid's in Pakistan right now, and he's sending me screenshots of some app that looked like eBay, Facebook Marketplace, something like that, and they were selling our closed bolt M249s, which I'd rather have an M240, but regardless, the open bolt 249s have a much lower cyclic rate, by the way, but the closed bolt M249, I've shot them, and I don't know what the military pays for them. I know that stuff, if you have, an SOT and an FFL, they're going to sell for $35,000. Not worth that much, but that's what they'd sell for. They were $1,200 on that app. $1,200. Like, golly. So maybe just expand on the weapons a little bit before we move on to the next one, please.
You have to understand that the weapons have been distributed in such a way that there is now almost $1 billion and a half worth of U.S. weaponry that's gotten back into Mexico, Central America, and the U.S. And it's just being funneled into the U.S. now. When you talk those kinds of numbers, that's huge weaponry. That is huge weaponry coming across. If you remember, I sent you an article that the Mexican cartels paid the Taliban $880 million. $880 million. What do you think that was for?
Well, so, I mean, for babysitting.
No, it wasn't for baby. That's for sure. It wasn't for babysitting. The amount of weaponry, the amount of technology that's been passed across and is being used on the border. It will be used against Border Patrol. It will be used inside of Texas. It'll be used inside of Colorado. It'll be used inside of California. You have put your own border security force at an absolute disadvantage because what's coming across is just unbelievable. Now that we see the drone videos that the Sinaloa cartel is now running drones, that changes the game completely because now you can, from your side of the border, put a drone over the wall and drop an explosive on Border Patrol. And that just changes the game completely. The problem we've got is that there's no track on what kind of weapons have come across, how much explosives have come across, how much weaponry has come across, how much bulletproof jackets have come across. It's just coming in cartons. It's cartons of weaponry coming across. And it's ending up in the terrorist hands, it's ending up in the cartel's hands inside the United States. And our fear is there was a guy that came across the border in San Diego and it's a very famous video, who said, "You don't know who I am? Don't worry, you'll know my name very soon." We've tracked that guy because that guy really bugged me. I said, this guy, no, there's something wrong with him. He first went to Seattle. From Seattle, he went to Boise. From Boise, he went to Iowa. He's now in Denver. And we have no idea what he's doing. He's got no cell phone. We are literally visually tracking him. But this guy, there's something wrong with him. And he's either a planner or he's a handler. He's one of the two. Because for someone to make that kind of a statement on video, don't worry, you'll know who I am very soon. That's somebody who's high up.
Crazy. So actually,
being able to travel all that way, he had money, and the guy walked across the border like he has no money. But to be able to travel to all those places, that's not cheap.
The way it works, Randy, is once you come across the border, you burn your passport. You destroy your passport.
Yep.
You have a prepaid cell phone. You make a phone call. You go to point one. Point one hands you cash, fake documents, and you start moving. Yep. And you keep moving until you get to the location where you're going to be housed. Once you're housed, you never leave the house. Yep. You have people that run and buy you groceries, cigarettes, chewing tobacco, whatever your flavor is. They take care of all of that for you. You never emerge again. And tracking this guy has been the hardest thing for us. Yeah, because this guy was someone that we knew there was something wrong with.
So you're saying if he shows up at your door,
put a bullet in him,
shoot him.
You can say that. You're in Pakistan. If we say that, we get kicked off platforms and the Fed show up at our front door. Anyway, moving on to the next one. It's actually fits in perfectly at this stage. It's from Khalid as well. We see a number of people talking about terrorists being watched by drones and technology in foreign countries. JTTF and DHF have lists of terrorists as well that they're watching. Here's our question for you. What are you watching them for? Why are you not issuing strike orders for drones to neutralize the threat before it becomes an attack? Watching terrorists never stopped terrorism. For decades, the Horn of Africa, Al-Qaeda camps, were monitored by satellite imaging. How many attacks did it stop? Do you think the intelligence agencies didn't know when Al-Qaeda moved from Africa to Afghanistan and set up their camps? Wake up. They know you're watching. They just don't care because they know the decision makers don't have the intestinal fortitude, balls, to issue the kill order. That's why Afghanistan has again become the global hub of terrorism funded by U.S. taxpayers. That's why Syria is following the same model funded by Arab, European, and American taxpayers. You are paying your enemies to train and attack you, and this time you arm them with American-made weaponry. The world has learned nothing since 9/11, not one thing. So pick that ball up and run with it, Khalid.
Back in 2023, there was a story that ran in the National. It's a UAE-based newspaper, where the Taliban had given permission to the U.S. to run drone overwatch. They were only allowed to run drone overwatch on ISKP camps. But there was one condition put into the drone overwatch. You could not fire a missile. So even if you saw a commander, you could not fire on him. The sense just boggles my mind. Now people are saying, well, we're watching them in Syria, we're watching them here, we're watching them here. Just explain to me what you're watching them for. I mean, Jeff has been part of the CIA before. He understands how much satellite imagery you guys had on Al-Qaeda in Horn of Africa, Hezbollah in the African states. And how many attacks did you stop? Because just by watching them, it doesn't stop the attack. They're still going to go through what they're doing. Sarah made a comment once. Sarah said that everything you hear them saying is scripted. They want you to hear that. What they're actually doing, you're not hearing. That's passed through couriers, face-to-face meetings, but what's being transmitted where you can hear it, that's purposely done so you can hear it.
Yeah. So
back before 9/11, you couldn't just drone strike somebody. First of all, there weren't armed drones.
There were no drone strikes.
That's right.
Yeah, those didn't come around till after 9/11, when they put Hellfires on them. But also, even if you wanted to take somebody out, you had to get a lethal finding that had to be signed by the President of the United States. And we had a chance at bin Laden. Sudan was going to hand him to us on the silver platter. And Clinton said no, because he goes, well, we don't have an indictment against him because he hasn't broken U.S. laws. Killed a shitload of American citizens, but they didn't have an indictment. So he said no. So we could have had him back in the, back in the 90s. They didn't start doing, the fatal drone strike stuff, until after 9/11. And they also lowered the authorization level. There used to be 2 or 3 people, and then it was 5. In fact, my old boss was, at the time, this was in 2002, he was one of the 5 people who could push the button on somebody. So they would say there was always one of them on duty at all times. So if they got some dude in the crosshairs, so they could say, okay, we've positively identified this guy. He's a bad guy. He's on the list. We have permission to fire. And he would say, you have permission to fire. And they would take him out. But they had to change all the procedures, and all the legal shit had to be completely turned upside down to get that done.
Yeah, but Jeff, I'm going to pick up and I'm going to ask you a question myself. Now that the rules have changed, can you not take out top leadership of the Taliban in Afghanistan? Can you not take out camps in Syria?
Well,
like
the thing
you
with Taliban is, I think since we pulled out and basically handed the country to them, and we're paying them every freaking month, they're not officially on paper considered an enemy of the United States. And so, just like you look at the Russians. Yeah, we know where a lot of Russian leaders are. We aren't drone striking them either. So there's got to be almost a declaration of war against them, and there really isn't that.
Well, it's one of the reasons that some did not want to pull out, right? Because if you're still there, if we have an installation there, that changes the rules. But
if we had left 500 guys at Bagram Air Force Base, it would have changed everything.
We could have destroyed the weapons before we left. That was the plan.
Yeah, but use it. That was Trump's original plan. And use that as an American presence and as a drone base.
Yeah.
And it's a defendable position. It's out in the middle of nowhere. You don't have a lot of civilians around there. So, it would have been ideal, but instead they gave them Bagram, and then we got stuck with, Kabul International Airport, which I have flown into. It's a shit show. The most indefensible place in probably all of Afghanistan.
Wow. That's crazy.
Well, it's why we're still in South Korea to this day. It's not just to protect South Korea.
No, that's
our convenience.
Yeah, but it's also a deterrent that, you start a war, you're going to start a war that you definitely cannot win because you're going to drag us into it immediately.
Yeah. Right. So, Randy, I just want to throw this out there just to get your comments. I was contemplating that now that these cartels and other bad guys have these FPV drones, what do you think they're learning as far as doing a better job of hiding from our drones? Or are we so much better equipped because of ISRs and predators that they can't even see?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. It's really hard to answer because one, I know that for one, we didn't really know everything either. I think part of Ukraine, this whole thing was to develop all these SOPs, both for offensive, defensive purposes.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to stockpile. How many do they have? Because you got to go out and test this kind of stuff, or you just test it over and over in theater. And when you lose one, you lose one, and you're okay, that didn't work. And you go to a different tactic. I think somebody was talking about here a little while ago, and they're like, well, people from Mexico, the Mexican military can come and train with special forces in the qualification course. I do know that we do have foreign, our allies can send people over and they will go through the special forces qualification course. Yeah, probably about 65% of it's the truth of it, right? It's just like when we go foreign internal defense and I trained other Iraqis. We didn't train them every last tactic and strategy we know. Who would do that? We trained them just good enough to be able to run with this and not get themselves killed. That's really what the truth. So this is the same thing. So I think one, it just shows again that evolution, and it elevates the game a lot for us because now they are learning those SOPs with drones too. And as we just saw in Iran, how critical that is.
Yeah, appreciate that, Randy. So last one here before y'all jet, and We move on to the next topic is, wow, Al-Qaeda's travel agency is wide open. Hop on a Syrian airline's flight to Libya, then catch Libyan wings out. In both countries, you can even grab a real passport under any name you want. Hopefully, I'm not the only person seeing this. Khalid, that's insanity. We trust these fake passports, and doesn't matter that Trump shut the border down. They're just going to walk through the front door this time instead of the back door.
Yeah, there. I put up a list of, I think, 9 or 10 countries today that have suspicious passports. Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Somalia, Sudan. These are all suspicious. And then people started commenting below: Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, and the list started to grow of how many suspicious passports we've got. As civilians, we all know this, but somehow Homeland doesn't know. And these guys are coming across the border and they're walking through and going, okay, my name is Tom Smith and I've got a Libyan passport. It goes back to that question that I posed a couple episodes back, that when the guy comes up, you ask him a couple questions about Libya. So whereabouts in Libya do you live? What's the weather like there? And figure out if they really are from Libya or not. Figure out if they really are from Syria or not. Jelani now is giving 30 passports a day. 30 passports a day to terrorists.
That's insane. Absolutely insane. So we're at the top of the hour. Mike Glover's joined the studio behind. So Randy, Jeff, appreciate your input. We'll see you all tomorrow night.
Hey, I just want to say one last thing. People got to realize, that Khalid and Command 11 is a legitimate intelligence agency. He may be smaller than the state-sponsored like what U.S. has, but he is getting the professional information. So if he's getting it, they have it. You got to ask yourself why they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
Peace out.
All right. Thanks, Randy. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff. All right. Mr. Glover, how are you?
How are you guys?
Living the dream. So we just covered an hour of some updates that Khalid had based on crazy stuff going on in the terrorism world. So now we're going to jump into the main topic with Mike and Khalid here. And we'll start off with Mumbai in 2008. We've discussed it a couple times in the past. We went partially in depth one time, but not all the way. But the Mumbai attacks in 2008, the Paris attacks in 2015 are essentially the ISIS blueprints for what's coming here for 9/11 2.0. So I'm going to pull up a timeline here. Let me get Mike on this stage as well. And I'm just going to hit this really quickly, and then I'm going to go to you first, Mike, and get your thoughts on why this was so effective with a small number of guys. There were only 10 guys, and they ran over Mumbai for, I think, 60 hours. So 2008 Mumbai attacks were a series of coordinated terror strikes by 10 Lashkar-e-Taiba gunmen targeting multiple sites, including hotels, a railway station, a cafe, a hospital, and a Jewish center. The attacks began on the evening of November 26 and concluded on the morning of November 29, 2008, resulting in at least 174 deaths, including 9 attackers and 300 plus injuries. So here's our hour by hour breakdown of this. So the initial assault started at 8 p.m., 2000 local time. 10 gunmen came in essentially on an inflatable boat, like a small Zodiac, and walked ashore with bags of weapons and grenades and stuff like that with them. Not too long after that, they started hijacking vehicles. They took the vehicles in different locations. So they split up. So they hit a cafe, they hit the Taj Mahal Palace, they hit a train station, and they also had taxi bombs that they set off in one of the locations. So here's what the timeline looks like. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to use it for reference as Mike and Cleet are breaking this down for it. And by the way, there's a movie called Hotel Mumbai that's a pretty good story as far as being, consistent with the official records. But as you can see, they attacked a whole bunch of different locations. And again, I'm going to let Mike and Cleet speak to this, but they ended at the Taj Mahal Hotel. And they literally went room to room and gathered everybody up to torture, maim, kill them while they made their demands. So, Mike, I'm going to go to you first as far as how do you even defend against this type of complex coordinated attack?
Well, I don't think you defend against it in numbers, because they're targeting soft targets that are very complacent in places that people recreate. I mean, you don't go to a hotel unless it's a dangerous place and you understand what's going on the ground. You go to a hotel to sleep. You go to a hotel to recreate. You go to a hotel to hang out with your family. So one of the problems in Mumbai specifically is individuals didn't have the ability to protect themselves because they don't have essentially a Second Amendment, right? It depends on security forces. So as an individual, you're a sitting duck. And I think that one of the problems with our misunderstanding of the worst case scenario, we call it most dangerous course of action in the military, is we are used to just civil conflict and skirmishes. The most deadly thing a law enforcement officer can do is go into a domestic violence situation where violence has already allegedly occurred, and then it's unknown, right? Here in Utah, in Tremont is what it's called, 2 police officers were killed a few nights ago, and a third shot with his police working dog. The 2 officers who were killed showed up on the scene and were gunned down. Again, it's about expectations. You don't have an expectation that's ever going to happen. So the best way to protect yourself in this particular situation happening in America is be armed, have a plan, be able to escalate your rules of engagement or your force OODA loop based on you not just having a pistol, but having something more capable. It's not surprising to me that is happening in Paris, Mumbai, Mali. I mean, I can go on and on. But I would be more surprised if it happened here with that number of casualties without a civilian interdicting the threat or stopping the threat because they're banging on the wrong door. Now, that's the optimistic perspective. But we see these types of things happen, and they happen all over the country with just small conflicts where you think, oh, this is taking place in Texas. Why hasn't this threat been eliminated by a civilian? And you wonder why, a dozen people were shot and half of them were killed, and not one civilian stepped up to the plate. Again, it's about time, place, and access, and they picked the softest targets. I think we made the analogy, the soft white underbelly, and they have a plan. And I think that's problematic for the country if there's a deliberate plan involving one or more people. It just takes one, by the way.
So before we go to Khalid, I want to ask you, just because you wore every single hat as a Green Beret, including comms, how did these guys maintain OPSEC before and during this attack? I mean, it seems like they must have had something in place for secure comms, or somebody would have heard something, you would think, at least.
Well, it's funny. It's funny, in a first world country like America, I learned this in the CIA. In a first world country, you would not, dead drops or basically not using technology to communicate, we think is a special covert means of communications. I actually went to JSOC's covert comms course, which is very classified. And essentially all I can tell you is it's basically like a special code of communicating, right? And it's called covert communications for a reason. And when you think about dead drops in a first world country, that's covert comms. In a third world country, that's normal comms. Yeah. So in normal circumstances, there's not a grotesque amount of communications via technology, which is why Osama bin Laden lived so long. It's why the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, I mean, they make mistakes, right? They use ICOMs, they use UHF, VHF, and they get interdicted because we triangulate their location. But for the most part, they stay off the radar because that's the way they operate in person, in a cafe, talking person to person. On target, for sure, they're not using covert comms. For sure, they're using walkie-talkies. And at that point, it's very hard on the X to be able to identify and isolate, because the priority is security. And we don't think, hey, where are these people communicating? We don't bring signal intelligence operators to directly find the guys on the ground, right? So it's an afterthought. It often happens in advance when they're sleeping, when they're bedding down, when they're planning, when they're moving in a vehicle. But for these guys, they live by covert communications.
Man, that's interesting. So we have a mutual friend that lives close to you, Tyler White. We've mentioned him before. He was Army, NSA, back at the Army. He told me years ago, and he's a comms expert, that's what he did in the NSA. He said, I can show you how to triangulate somebody's position within a couple of minutes. But at the NSA level, I can tell where you are within 2 or 3 seconds anywhere around the world. We will pick your exact coordinates. I mean, it's that precise. It's pretty crazy stuff. So Khalid, just give us your initial high-level overview of the complexity of Mumbai and why ISIS considers that one of their blueprints for 9/11 2.0.
Well, if you look at it, I mean, the way that they came into Mumbai, it was via the water, and no one would ever think the terrorists would come in via the water. As soon as they got off the boats, they hit a cafe. Once they hit that cafe, police responded. As the police responded there, they were moving they broke up into groups and moved to separate locations. They hit a synagogue. They hit a subway station. They hit another cafe. They hit another hotel. And they were continuously moving. As they kept on moving, the police was confused. Once they got to the Taj Hotel, that's where they laid siege. They went in, they took it over, they started calling passports, they started checking identification. If you were a foreigner, you were shot on the spot. If you were an Indian, you were held hostage. You have to keep in mind that Mumbai was carried out a year after recon. David Headley was in Mumbai a year beforehand, taking pictures, writing notes, getting all that information as a tourist.
Explain who he is again. He was in America, but I'll let Khalid speak to it.
David Headley was caught by the FBI smuggling drugs. This is how the story that ProPublic has got a story on their website where they go deep into David Headley's background. He was caught by the FBI smuggling drugs. The FBI said to him that we want to turn you into an asset, and we want to put you in Pakistan, and we want you to monitor Lashkar-e-Taiba. Lashkar-e-Taiba is one of the hardest terrorist groups to infiltrate because the way they operate, it's not a joke how they run. You spend a month sweeping the prayer hall. Then after you spent a month cleaning the prayer hall, they tell you, go home, talk to your mother, your father, your brothers, and your sisters. Ask them for permission that you can join the jihad. This is before you've ever fired a bullet. After you go back, you get permission from your parents that, yes, you can join. Then you come back. Then they train you. Then it's like the mob. You don't leave alive. You either die by their hands or you die by the armed forces' hands. And you move that way, and it is covert. It is quiet. It's like Mike was saying, the conversations are face to face, and they're not even in a language you'll understand. They have code words for everything. We have code books for every terror group because we've spent so much time inside their camps that we've built code word books for them. So we know what word means what symbol means what. That is a huge process to go through, especially with an organization like Lashkar-e-Taiba. David Headley came from the US, joined Lashkar-e-Taiba without any problems. They said, oh, we've got an American passport holder. He wants to become part of our group. We could maybe potentially use him in the US. Let's indoctrinate him. They indoctrinated him. They put him through the training. They sent him to Mumbai. They said, here's your money. Go and stay in the nicest hotels, eat the greatest food, take pictures, write down notes, tell us what you see, what you know, what you hear, and tell us where the best targets are. He wrote probably a notebook's worth of information on every single target in Mumbai. came back, handed over to the commanders, and he was sat down and relaxed. And they started laying out the attack plan, that these are the targets. These are how many people we need. This is where we're going to move from. Lashkar-e-Taiba is based in northern Punjab. That is probably a 19-20-hour drive from where they launched the Zodiac from.
So, quick question on that before we move on to Paris. At the beginning of the movie Hotel Mumbai, they come up on the Zodiac, they get out, and there's other people on the beach. Did that really happen? They just got out on the beach?
Yeah, that really happened. That's
Wow.
literally how it happened. Because I remember we watched Ajmal Kasab, the only terrorist that survived the Mumbai attack. We watched his interrogation video, and he walked them through the whole thing. This is how we landed. This is how we got out. This is what we did. This is how we moved. This is how we distributed our targets. When you listen to him explain it, you just sit there and go, oh my God, that level of planning they came with. And they did all that planning based on one guy's notes.
So when he spilled his guts like that, I know he was executed, but does that mean he doesn't get the 72 virgins?
No, he doesn't.
Spilled the guts? No. Okay.
No.
Like just curious.
You actually have to die in battle according to the jihadi scholars. I don't call them Islamic scholars. According to the jihadi scholars, you actually have to die in battle to achieve the 72 virgins.
All right, fair enough. So Mike had touched on a couple things earlier that I just want to quickly mention. Ryan Geho, we've had him on a couple times. I don't remember if you met him or not, Mike. So he was former CIA, State Department security. He's got amazing credentials. He's getting ready to release an app for iPhones and Android phones that's unlike anything that I've seen before. So whether you have a connection or not, so say the bad guy shut down the network, it'll work either way. It's better if it's connected, but it'll still work. And you can punch in where you are and what's happening, as well as your family members, and it'll tell you where to go, where not to go, what you should be doing to, not make yourself a target to the terrorist. It's really interesting. I mean, if it works the way that he says, which I have every reason to believe it will, that's going to be one hell of a tool. Then we're going to do some testing on that next month when he releases it. But let's move along to Paris, because I really want to get into the simulation of Buffalo, and if we have time, Madison, Wisconsin being attacked. So here's what we've got for Paris. And again, I'm not going to read every single bullet. I'm going to throw these up on today's SITREP, which is on the front page of our Substack, which is just at survivaldispatch.news. You're welcome to download the files. You don't have to be a paying member to do that, by the way. So November 2015 Paris attacks were a series of coordinated terrorist attacks carried out by ISIS affiliated militants on the evening of November 13th and into the early hours of November 14th. The events unfolded across multiple locations in Paris and Saint Denis, primarily targeting crowded public spaces. Below is an hour-by-hour timeline with key events in each block. All times CET. The attack began around 21:30, concluded when it ended at this theater, which was approximately 00:58, November 14th. So again, I'm not going to read every single bullet here because I really want to get into our simulation tonight. What I really want to drive home is that it's a similar type of process of what went down in Mumbai. So in other words, when these guys landed, they went north a little bit and then they went south for the rest of their plan and ended at one particular location. So Mike, because you're in the CIA, as well as the fact that most people don't realize Green Berets are also experts in intel, they said, the French authorities said that they were on their radar. The same thing the FBI loves to say here. How do you miss something like this? I mean, this was a big attack. And did they let it happen? Did they think it couldn't happen? Like, what's your opinion as an intelligence expert on how did it slip between the cracks?
So when I was in Libya for 6 months post Benghazi, from October 2012 into 2013. And I was the counterterrorism lead for the 1208 program, a congressional mandated counterterrorism program, which gives its authorities and just amplifies the noise. So we have, guns, ammo, a CT force. The actual guys that I took over were Delta Force assessed and selected converted into a counterterrorism force. And so me and two of my guys were the first to deploy there. It was actually AFRICOMMAND's first 1208 program. I had been in the unit before, in Delta before, and I was familiar with 1208 programs. The problem is every 1208 program up into that point was ran by Joint Special Operations Command, which for the layman who's listening to this is the Fortune 1 of this industry, in this space. And when I got into this role, I had high expectations, except AFRICOM had never run a 1208 program. So when I asked, for example, for ammo and guns, because my guys were literally using sticks, I made them make sticks and do it's called mod demos. It's demonstrations of their counterterrorism capability on purpose in front of generals, in front of chief of bases in the CIA. I purposely made them use sticks. They could have used air guns, but I made them use sticks because I wanted to basically show them that we have nothing and we're using branches of wood to be able to replicate this effort. They weren't taking it serious. Libya and Benghazi had kicked off this crap storm of people actually paying attention for the first time. The GIGN had deployed, for example, from France to Libya to support their embassy that was just hit with a vehicle-borne IED, which is not often even discussed. There was a myriad of attacks all over Libya. And all of a sudden after Benghazi, they start paying slight attention. When I sat in the brief, which was an international brief, mostly to the Five Eyes, the countries that we're partnered with the closest, and we share information. It's the 5 English-speaking countries. When we did that meeting and we shared information with the French, the amplification of all of the threats were at its peak. And when we found out how many foreign fighters, especially from the Green Mountains of Benghazi, had deployed back into not only the region of the Middle East, where they're fighting Americans and coalition forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, but also into Europe, it blew my mind. And what blew my mind even more, and what stuck with me, being that counterterrorism lead, is the total disregard, and including the cowardice of multiple countries pulling out, including the French, including the Canadians, who said, this is too political, this is too crazy, we need to pull out, and pulled all their resources. So at the same time, the intel is saying we have more terrorist operators that are on the ground ready to conduct attacks. They were pulling all resources because they didn't want the political ramification of some incident taking place internationally and making it seem like they weren't prepared. So I would have thought that domestically they would have been focused. And look, I'll tell you, from experience, the GIGN and the guys that I know that were there at that VBID when the embassy was hit, they're heroes. I was actually at an awards ceremony. I might have been a civilian at that time because I came back to Libya for another 6 months where I lived in Tripoli, and I was running a force protection project for the CIA before I went to GRS. So when I was there, I was at a dinner with the French, with the GIGN, and they were getting awards for how they protected their ambassador. The conversations I had with them was frustration of them not being utilized because they're a domestic asset as well, just like the 22 SAS and all the SSA, the Special Air Services around the coalition militaries and countries, where they could utilize them for domestic threats. In fact, many of the terrorists that were in these situations in Paris were killed by the GIGN. One that sticks out is the one where they go to breach. It's like it almost looks like a liquor store. It's kind of like a small grocery store, and you can see the windows. And they go to breach, and they get shot at immediately. One guy clacks himself off, and one operator by himself with a pistol and a shield, which made me want to use shields, went in, took rounds on the shield, and took out the bad guy. Overall, in summary, I think all of these countries never take these threats seriously because they've been immune, because they've been lucky. And then as soon as there was deliberate terrorist operations conducted on their soil, all of a sudden they're activating the French Foreign Legion recruitment. They're paying attention. They're taking a hard stance politically. But by then it's too late. I think the public, like in this case, the American public, has already lost trust in you.
Just a couple quick things before I go to Khalid, and feel free not to answer this if you don't want to, but you were in Libya when Benghazi went down. How much information did you have when that was going down? Like, did you know just how bad it was? And if so, what was going through your mind not being deployed to help?
Yeah. I wasn't on the ground when Benghazi happened on September 11th of 2000. It's actually September 11th into the 12th. I was in the Delta Force compound when it happened. And me and Tu Lamb, I'll call him out because he's talked about it before.
This was in Libya.
Somebody called Ronin Tactics.
This was in Libya, though, correct?
No. This is prior to Libya.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
Yeah. Or this is prior to Benghazi. So I had already been pinpointed as the first. So me and Tu Lamb left the unit and we went to stand up this counterterrorism force called the CRIF, the Crisis Response Force for Africa. Ironically, with all the focus on counterterrorism, we didn't have a CT force for Africa. We didn't have a crisis contingent for Africa. We have the National Mission Force, but there's a time constraint where it takes them to deploy. The methodology behind that is, or the idea behind it is, if we have a CRIF in country training the Libyans and they get the on-call, well, they could be the first to respond, contain, and then focus on counterterrorism operations with a handover to the National Mission Force, Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. And I say that very casually because the CRIF has been disbanded, which is lunacy to me because that protocol makes the most sense. It's like a local SWAT team containing it because they're in the area and then handing it over to FBI HRT with their expertise. So when me and Tu Lamb were doing crosstalks, key leader engagements with Delta, that morning we were supposed to meet with Ambassador Stevens, the team lead from another program that was a Delta Force team lead, and some of the operators on the ground. Well, we went in and it was like, hey, what's going on? They had already flexed to Libya that morning, that early morning, because of what happened in Benghazi. So I knew I was on the hook to deploy to Libya. We had just been validated by JSOC, so they amplified the timeline. And so I sat in multiple briefs in Delta Force's compound that were basically briefed by the FBI, briefed by counterterrorism officials, and then government officials on the situation. And it was dire. It was a dire circumstance. I will just say lastly that the two operators from Delta that were involved with that, there's been stories about this. I'm not saying anything that hasn't been released open source. Both of them friends of mine should have been awarded the Medal of Honor because of what they did that night. Now, the politics of it is if you get the Medal of Honor, your Delta Force career is over. I know like the depiction in 13 Hours Benghazi and also the frustration by the CIA and the beef they had with the Army, because I was a GRS operator as well as an operator in the military. And what I'll tell you is there was a lot of confusing things that were going on. And when Delta Force made the call that they were going to enact the National Mission Force and they blew out of Fort Bragg, they had tactical control. They were TACOM, or they were in charge of the entire thing. The CIA was not. And that, the Delta Force is ran by the president as far as authorities in these extreme circumstances. And one, they should have got the Medal of Honor. And two, there's a lot of CIA guys that I had to educate that were confused about this. When they got the call, they were in charge. And those guys were on the ground and they took charge. If it wasn't for the GRS operators and those two Delta Force operators that commandeered a Gulfstream to fly to Benghazi, Libya from Tripoli, you would have seen one of the biggest hostage circumstances probably in national history, because all those people, including State Department and CIA, would have been taken hostage by AQ. I mean, they were Al-Qaeda Islamic Maghreb, AQIM affiliates, and also a conglomerate of basically everybody who had come to the scene. Abu, what's the name? Khalid, it's
does it start with a G, Garib or something like that?
Yeah, we did roll them up later on. It's Abu. I'll think about it. But he was rolled up by a joint operation conducted by DevGru and the unit. And he was also openly talking to the New York Times and other news organizations. But pretty crazy situation. Abu Khatala, that's his name.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mike. So
he's in Guantanamo right now.
Interesting. A couple quick questions for you, Khalid, before we move on to the simulations of 9/11 2.0 here. What tactical innovations did ISIS implement in Paris that they hadn't used in any earlier attacks? And has our law enforcement, whether it be European or American, adjusted their response protocols, their SOPs based on Paris, to your knowledge?
No. Let me take the second question first. In terms of changing their protocols, not at all. They're still in a state of complacency. The tactics that changed in the Paris attack was that they kicked off the attack with suicide bombers. And once you start using suicide bombers, you create a panic situation where people are starting to flee. When people start to flee, if you've got gunners outside, you're shooting fish in a barrel. They're coming out the door and you're taking them out. They're coming out the door and you're taking them out. And it was the first time that we had seen ISIS, because in Iraq it was mostly vehicle-borne IEDs that they had used, and we had not seen a suicide bomber kick something off and then bring an attack out. In Paris, it was the first time that we saw, and their target was the president of France at the time. He was at the stadium where they started the attack from. So if you think about it, you came in, you launched one suicide attack. When people started to move out, the guy clacked off, another guy clacked off. So you had your second suicide attack. Then you spread out. Once you spread out, it was an assault. And every guy had a suicide vest on him. If he felt like the game was out and he wasn't going to get out, clacked off, game over, mass casualties. So it's the mentality. See, we've said this a few times, and I'm sorry, I'm doing the federal government's job for them and the intelligence agency's job for them. You're still running Al-Qaeda's playbook. Al-Qaeda is past. That mentality is gone. What ISIS is doing, they are running fast, furious attacks. They are trying to get you herded into one location where they can open fire, they can clack off on you. We've seen it with the vehicle attacks. We've seen it with the suicide attacks. We've seen it with machetes. They are going after high target-rich environments. No one has figured out that playbook yet. Everyone is still looking at Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda takes 5 to 7 years to plan out an attack. It's something big, and the possibility of us being able to stop it exists. ISIS doesn't run that way. ISIS goes radicalize, attack, radicalize, attack, radicalize, attack. And they will do it with a gun. They will do it with a vehicle. They will do it with a knife. They will do it with an explosive. They don't care. They want that impact. They want to be in the news saying, look, we carried out another attack. Look, we carried out another attack. Our intelligence agencies, including Pakistan's intelligence services, we are still running on the Al-Qaeda playbook. And that's why we aren't ready for what's going on now. Because you are not monitoring like we monitor all the encrypted chats. We are in all the groups. We're reading, we're listening, we're inside the camps, we're listening there. The ISI has a huge problem with me because we have better intelligence sources than they do. Pakistan's National Intelligence Service, we have better assets than they do. Because you're running the old playbook and we're running the new one.
That's amazing. So I always have something playing in my office over here. Let me see that camera. Good bunch of cameras here. And Khalid and I were talking earlier today. I had this thing playing over there, and it was 2006, this documentary. And all of a sudden I heard it say Al-Qaeda's next plan for America is to hit 10 to 15 mid-tier cities. I was like, what? Like almost 20 years ago, the intel that Khalid's brought to the table just recently it's amazing how far back that goes. So quickly here, I just want to show something. It's going to be up in the sit rep. We showed this before, but it's important. This is a spreadsheet I put together. I know, Mike, color you shocked, right? That I made a spreadsheet of all this stuff. So there's 4 tabs across the bottom. So I used both Grok. Actually, I used Grok, Claude, and Venice to gather information prior to defund the police, after defund the police. So you have in this tab, for example, you have a bunch of tier 1 cities with their population. So our tier 2, which would be 100 to 500,000. And you have head count for the cops before and after, like even Birmingham, Alabama, 1,184 cops prior to defund the police, 909, which is not enough. It gets into, are there SWAT teams? How big are the SWAT teams? Buffalo, for example, on one of these tabs, and you just click on the tabs across the bottom. And again, I'll make this available. It'll be a download in the sit rep with everything else. You can go through it, but a city the size of Buffalo has 25 SWAT team members. And Mike, as an operator, I want to hear your thoughts on that. Buffalo gets attacked. Let's say they're on the list. They're on Khalid's list. They fit all the criteria, mid-tier city with 1 tier 1 trauma center, with an airport that has a lot of planes that AQ can take. What are the chances of 25 SWAT team guys and a bunch of regular officers who have not been trained in anything like this at all? What chances do they stand?
Yeah, here I've trained. So I was post certified as a firearms instructor, and the way I got my post certification in the state of California was training counterterrorism, because they had an emerging threat. There were innovators that were thinking about the future, and they were like, "Hey, what happens if we come across a suicide bomber? Well, let's bring in Mike to talk about it, talk about options, and then improve everything from equipment to technical capability to tactical capability." One of the major issues that you run into with a SWAT team is it's a deliberate event. It's a deliberate offensive maneuver. They do a call out. I mean, technically it's the mobilization. When they mobilize, they have to get half of the guys are off. Their pagers go off. Their cell phones go off. They go to their vehicle. They get their kit. They drive their vehicle to a consolidation point. They're not used to doing what's called TST targets, time-sensitive targets, and they don't have anybody on standby. So, for example, Bernardino, I used to train Bernardino SWAT and super active SWAT team. Amazing guys, some real good talent. When I think it was a husband-wife team, AQ inspired, decided to get their jihad on, I actually taught one of the guys who took out the female. And I saw the post-analysis, her body, the equipment she had, some of the things that they just determine in sensitive site exploitation. And that guy happened to be a former military guy. And so he was on regular patrol, had his SWAT kit in the vehicle, and was able to reinforce his position, get his carbine versus his pistol on patrol. The reality is this is not going to be a deliberate event. If it is a deliberate event, as the clock turns, like Uvalde, where 19 children were killed, like Mandalay Bay, where 50 plus civilians were killed, like Virginia Tech, where 32 civilians were killed by one lone shooter in all of these events. When you think about the capability, it's a very deliberate process, and that's the reason why it's going to be difficult for these guys to activate and go into active shooter mode. But have you ever, because I've trained active shooter all over the country for police officers, for school systems, for private classes. The problem with that is when you think about active shooter, they always consider it's just one person. And it's not one person with capability. So if the Op 4 comes out and we play the drill, the Op 4 comes out, he steps in the hall, he gets gunned down. Well, guess what? That's not a realistic scenario. Take it back to the North Hollywood shooting, where those two losers hopped up on PCP with full battle rattle. They had full kit. I mean, they had ski masks. They didn't have Kevlar on their head, but they roll out with body armor. One had an SKS, and I believe one had an AK variant. and they have 7.62 by 39. So they go out with firepower and they start handing law enforcement their ass. They injure 17 officers and lots of civilians. How do they counter that? They go into gun stores to confiscate CAR-15s before the laws completely took over California, and they got ammo because all of them were carrying mostly 357 pistols, mostly revolver firearms and shotguns that they carried in their vehicle. So imagine this scenario: a 25-man SWAT team isn't fast enough, patrol officers aren't prepared enough, and nobody has training in terrorism threats. So like Khalid said, they're going to clack off a device. They're going to go into it, just like this happened in Tremont. What happened is it was a domestic call. They arrive on scene. The shooter has a rifle. He immediately kills the first officer who has a pistol. The other officer hears officer down. He responds with a pistol. He gets killed. The third officer with his police dog are in the vehicle, gets shot up by the rifle, and they exfil. And then by the time they get to the scene, he had already surrendered, and they called in the SWAT team to do a cursory secondary search. It was already over. So we have to think outside the box here, because it's not going to be the SWAT team that stops the threat. It's either going to be the military veteran police officer with his carbine because he switched on, because he has experience fighting terrorism, or the civilian who's listening to this podcast, who's paying attention, who's like, I have to be prepared for my family and my community. And if shit hits the fan, I'm going to handle business and protect and defend. That's how it's going to be done. And if honestly, in conclusion, if law enforcement, the federal government had this conversation with the American people, then we wouldn't be in a circumstance where Ukraine's handing out rifles to grandmas and grandpas after the fact. Because that's where we'll be post this situation, where there's going to be second, third, and 50 other events that happen that constrain our country even more.
Yeah, that's awesome information, Mike. So we're going to jump into the simulation for Buffalo. And if we have time, we'll hit Madison as well. What we basically did is we took Khalid's intel and we fed it to several different AIs and asked it to draw a timeline based on open source intelligence plus Khalid's intelligence and plus what we know, about each of these tier 2 cities. I can tell you there's no good news in here, but I like how Mike pointed out, you know, somebody who's got training fighting terrorists or a very prepared citizen is probably the only chance that we stand against this stuff. So let me get into this here. So this is a high contrast hour by hour breakdown of a hypothetical multi-target attack scenario impacting Buffalo as part of a nationwide wave hitting 10 to 15 tier 2 cities, all of whom with one tier 1 trauma center. And this file, by the way, will be on today's sit rep as well once the broadcast wraps up. So this timeline is constructed based on the provided intelligence scenario, assuming a coordinated nationwide attack on 10 to 15 tier 2 cities, including Buffalo. I filled in logical blanks with high probability assumptions drawn from real world patterns of terrorist attacks. Example, 9/11, Mumbai 2008, Paris 2015, and recent ISIS-inspired incidents. U.S. emergency response protocols and Buffalo-specific details such as its population, approximately 278,000, 1.16 million when you take all of the outlying suburbs. Infrastructure, Erie County Medical Center is the sole adult level 1 trauma center. Buffalo Niagara International Airport, approximately 60 public schools, major malls like Walden Galleria, and office hubs like Seneca One Tower and emergency resources. Buffalo PD has 740 officers, fire department with approximately 710 firefighters. Assumptions include the attacks begin on a weekday, say Wednesday, September 10th, 2025. Again, this is hypothetical. We're not saying that's happening on September the 10th. To maximize chaos in schools and offices, simultaneous nationwide start overwhelms mutual aid. So mutual aid is when a law enforcement agency calls the surrounding areas and says, we need the cavalry, send in some backup. So let me just get back to the right spot here. Local responders are stretched thin. Post 9/11 airport security is bypassed via on-ground hijacks during distraction, but success rate is partial due to armed pilots and air traffic control. So essentially, The intelligence that Khalid's assets have gathered basically say ISIS is attacking these soft targets, and basically law enforcement deploys everything to that area. It's one of the most famous quotes from 9/11 1.0, send everything you've got. And when that happens, then Al-Qaeda goes after hijacking planes on the ground at the airport, because all they have is on-prem security. There's no mutual aid available to them because everybody's gone to the other attack. So sarin deployment is feasible based on historical precedents like Tokyo subway station 1995, but containment is probable if detected early. So the problem with sarin is that it disperses very quickly outdoors, but if you put it into an HVAC system, it vaporizes the second it hits the air. And I'm not an expert in this, but multiple people have told me that if it even touches your skin, it'll go subcutaneous and kill you that way as well. So yeah, infrastructure attacks, so cyber, physical, grid networks occur 6 to 12 hours into the scenario to amplify the fear after the media gets the word out of what's going on. Federal response, FBI, DHS, National Guard ramps up within 24 to 48 hours, but the initial hours are local chaos. Hospital siege lasts 48 to 72 hours. So instead of the Hotel Mumbai, the final destination is that tier 1 trauma center, with a 50 to 70% probability of sarin release in the hospital. If there's nothing negotiated, there's not going to be anything negotiated. This is going to end up either we have to bomb the building or send people like Mike Glover, commandos in there to take them out. So the estimated casualties for somewhere like Buffalo is 5,000 to 10,000 initially, and scaled up potentially to somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 across 10 to 15 cities. These are numbers that Al-Qaeda has published repeatedly as far as what their goals are. And in this case, it's interesting because the AI said, yes, that's well within the realm of possibilities. So they hijack, let's say, 12 to 15 planes, 80% success rate in crashes. So they're crashing these planes into buildings around the country, but probably not too far from where they took off, because I would like to think we'd be smart enough to scramble some jets as soon as we knew, or fighters as soon as we knew what was going on. So recent U.S. assessments note elevated ISIS Al-Qaeda threats from Afghanistan post-2021 withdrawal, with 10 to 20,000. That's actually 200,000. I'm not sure why it misprinted that. SIA, special interest aliens. It's a fancy way of CBP saying known terrorist or affiliate of a terrorist. And we've confirmed that multiple times with JJ Carroll, by the way, which means the real number is probably an order of magnitude higher. So the timeline starts at hour 0. This is 0800, day number 1. Events here are focused on Buffalo, but again, this is happening simultaneously in 10 to 15 other cities, and this is, of course, Eastern time. So I'm going to start with the first one, then come to you, Mike, and then Khalid for comments on each step as we go through this timeline. So 0800, multiple soft targets, schools like Buffalo Public Schools, and there were particular ones which I won't read out here. You can download them, as well as the Galleria Mall, the Seneca One Tower, coordinated ISIS sleeper cells, estimated 20 to 30 members, infiltrated again by these SIA releases at the border, thanks to Joe Biden and Obama, activate simultaneously nationwide. In Buffalo, 4 to 6 cells target soft spots disguised as HVAC techs. They access roofs at 3 to 4 schools. They deploy timed sarin canisters into HVAC systems set for 15, 30-minute dispersal. They barricade the exits and detonate small bombs, gunfire in hallways. Basically, everybody locks down and then is exposed to the sarin. And you have similar hits at retail places, office buildings. Initial casualties, 200 to 500 dead or injured per site from gunfire and bombs. Sarin exposure begins affecting 500 to 1,000 indoors. Panic ensues. 9/11 overwhelmed within minutes. So that's just the first hour. So, Mike, give me your thoughts on what does this first hour look like from every perspective, whether you're a student, a parent, a teacher, law enforcement, EMS, any of those.
So the first hour is chaos. I mean, it's mass casualties, right? It's how these smaller attacks that were able to penetrate our country, including copycats like the Boston Marathon bombers, they wanted chaos and calamity right out the gate, and they got it. And so when you look at this event, it is, I still remember I was in college. I just left active service as an infantryman, and I was in college on 9/11, and I was an E5 in the National Guard. And I saw what was happening on the news disseminated from obviously New York City, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And as these things were transpiring, I left the cafeteria, went home. I don't know why I did this. I still wonder why I did this. And I started packing my military duffel bag with my military equipment, because I'm like, it's time. We're going to war. So when you look at the initial hour, it's to create as much chaos and calamity as possible. But I mean, here's what's wild. 19 Al-Qaeda operatives infiltrate the country, and they take a deliberate path. What just happened with this CDL holder out of California that killed this family of 3? When I think about that, I immediately thought about 9/11. Because what these guys did is they went to Embry-Riddle in Daytona Beach, Florida, and they started getting educated. I mean, right down the street where I grew up, they started getting educated on how to fly airplanes. What's to stop somebody to get a CDL, to get a private pilot's license, to fly a Gulfstream even, because they're illegal, but there's states that are sanctuary cities like Boston under WU, which is just bananas, and California that are facilitating terrorism. I mean, they're literally allowing, through all their legal loopholes, with the push out of the cooperation with ICE and the federal government, facilitating terrorism. And what they haven't realized is likely they're going to be the center of these attacks, right? They're going to be the focal point, is what we call it in intel and operations, the focal point. And when that happens, oh my gosh, I can't imagine the reactive nature of the federal government to shut down every leftist liberal city in America that's sanctuary and convert it and basically to take it over. Now, if you appreciate your freedom, you wouldn't want that to happen, but that's bound to happen. And I'm concerned that, the mass attack in Buffalo isn't going to be anything that we've likely seen before. It could be a semi-truck full of explosives. It could be a semi-truck rolling through Times Square, clacking itself off. And these guys are creative. They've been giving complete access and placement to do whatever they want to get their CDL. I mean, you see that dude's reaction when those 3 people, innocently, as he's cutting a U-turn, just smash into the side of his truck, and he's inconvenienced. Yeah. That is the nature of a foreigner who has no skin in the game, who hates this country. And so you take that, amplify it by 1,000, and then what you have is a terrorist who's basically been enabled and is looking for the best opportunity to create mass casualties. So it is going to be a lot of dead people, a lot of people trying to respond, and complete chaos. They're not going to know where they are, where they bedded down, and there's not enough capability and capacity to contend with that. Even if you start dialing it in and figuring it out, that is going to take probably days to come to the understanding of what's taking place, because there's not enough tactical elements to address a mass scale attack like you're describing in New York.
Just a couple quick points before you go, Clede. Number one, the truck driver that killed the family just south of us here in Florida does not speak English. And when he took his CDL test, he identified one road sign correctly and no others. That the blood of that family is on Gavin Newsom's hands and the Democrats in California. And Lord only knows how many of them out there like that. Mike hit on a good point as well. Think of what happened to our civil liberties after 9/11 1.0, and people were willingly giving them up. And then think of what happened during Charlie 19. Just imagine what this will do to our civil liberties. We'll go from probably the most permissive environment in the world to not so much. But I also want to mention, Mike said when he was in the National Guard, Mike went on, obviously, active duty, deployed. He was an E9. He's one of only 2 E9s I've ever met. He doesn't think it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I've got 2 more quick quotes. when I got my initial weapons permit, it was in Texas, and you were only allowed to carry what you qualified with, and I qualified with a 357, Mike. That thing was horrible compared to what my carry is now.
My dad was a law enforcement officer. The first gun I ever shot was his duty 357 at a soda can when I was 6 or 7 years old.
Right on.
In Florida, behind Tomoka State Prison, right down the road.
Yeah, so that's Mike and I are familiar. We used to live right here in this neighborhood. Embry-Riddle's not 10 miles the way the bird flies from here.
Yeah.
So question from the chat, Khalid, and then I want you to speak of this first hour. Why is no one paying attention, this September 10th syndrome, as you refer to it?
Well, we've been having this conversation with a lot of people in U.S. intelligence. Senior level people are not interested, but they are interested. I mean, in April, when we put out the threat, we put out the threat, I think it was the 4th of April, the 6th of April. 2-line tweet we put out that there is a threat to hospitals in the United States. It is an ISKP. It's part of the Al Qaeda threat on the aviation. This will be a ground assault. On the 11th, we put out our first written assessment of what was coming. On the 16th, the FBI released a document, a product, specifically for healthcare centers to harden their hospitals. But at the same time, they said it's not a credible threat. So every hospital that was looking at this product, they were going, wait a minute, you're saying it's not credible, but you released a product for terrorism for healthcare. So how are you telling us it's not credible? There's something's not clicking here. The thing that we're having an issue with is when you talk to the guys lower down in the intelligence services, all of them know. I mean, literally, I've been told flat out, we know this attack is coming, but no one's listening. No one cares. No one is interested in taking any action. And we turn around and go, listen, if we're tracking this with this kind of detail from Pakistan, how is it that you guys are not doing the same thing? At least you should know where they are. At least you should know what they're doing, who they're coordinating with, who they're talking with, where are they working, what potential cities are they going to hit. We've already got a list of 20 cities. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are sitting right now going through a list of 30 cities and picking the 10, 15 they're going to attack. Based on all the recon, all the video, all the intelligence they've gathered, they're now building their list. And when we look at it from the U.S. point of view, we're going, is it because you've got a guy sitting with the president who has no idea how battlefield terrorism operates? Is it because you waited so long to get Joe Kent confirmed by the Congress? Is it because you've tied Tulsi Gabbard's hands that she isn't able to talk about the things that she really needs to talk about? Because you've got two people in the government right now, and now there's talk that Kash Patel is going to be removed as FBI director, which is another big red flag for us. That why is he being removed after 5-6 months? When Tulsi and Joe Kent, who are battlefield experienced, understand what terrorism looks like, understand how to dissect a threat, their hands are tied by someone sitting in the White House. You all of a sudden have put all of America at risk. And if we take our number that there are 18,000 military-aged males who are well-trained, able to carry out these attacks, and we say, okay, 10 to 20, 50 at the most in each city, you are talking someplace in the neighborhood of 40, 45 cities that you can hit in wave after wave after wave after wave. The question we have on our side is, when Trump came to power, Palantir was given a contract to create a database. Then the U.S. Army gave Palantir a $10 million contract behind that. Are we looking at a potential terrorist attack to be a reason for a security state?
Right. Yeah, that's why I was commenting on Mike's comments on that. Just a couple quick things. I'm sure you're aware of this, but this is basically the guide from CISA, which is basically IT stuff, right? This is cybersecurity. They're the only ones that have put out anything recently for hospitals and healthcare security awareness for soft targets and crowded places. So these are the teams that are supposed to be looking after, technology infrastructure, but they're putting stuff out there saying, hey, there's a serious threat at our hospitals around the country, which leads me to a question for you, Mike, is the whole purpose of creating the ODNI after 9/11 was to stitch all of these intel agencies together. But we've got the FBI publicly saying multiple times, by the way, prior to Trump taking office, that all the red lights are flashing, that things are bad, 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 to now saying, no, it's okay, there's nothing wrong. You got cybersecurity guys coming out and giving people advice on how to physically protect their hospitals. The last comment is Andrew Bailey just accepted the position as co-FBI director with Dan Bongino. Andrew's a friend of ours. He was elected twice to be the attorney general in Missouri. He won a landslide case for $25 billion against the CCP, and he's been seizing Chinese properties across the country because they didn't defend themselves. And the judge said, yeah, you're guilty. You inflicted $25 billion of damage with Charlie 19. And he's been on a tear. Sucks for Missouri, but I was kind of hoping that Andrew would be our national AG at some point in time. But with Khalid mentioning that there's this rumor that Kash Patel may step down, I think that's part of the reason why Andrew Bailey was brought in. He's a rock star, by the way. So, Mike, your thoughts on ODNI and all to pull these disparate intels together, but that's not happening. I think you're on mute, Mike. We've got no volume from you. No volume. No. Oh, yeah, I've got Khalid. I've got no volume from you, Mike. I can see you clicking on and off like for the mute on my screen here. Yeah, just bounce and come back in again and see if that fixes it for you. So, Khalid, your thoughts while we're waiting on Mike to leave and come back in again on the ODNI. It was meant to pull all of this stuff together. Yeah. It's not happening.
This is the thing that doesn't make sense to us. I mean, ODNI's creation was specifically to coordinate all the intelligence agencies, whether it be FBI, CIA, DIA, all the intelligence agencies were supposed to feed into ODNI. And they were supposed to filter out information and figure out what was a threat and what wasn't a threat. ODNI is not being used that way. ODNI and I hate saying it this way, but ODNI right now is being used like a political organization. You've got Tulsi looking at Russiagate. You've got Tulsi looking at things that don't matter. And when President Trump turned around and said, Tulsi's intelligence on Iran is wrong, that kind of really shook us. That how can you come back on your director and say, well, your intelligence is wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Mike, I can hear your background there. So just want you to speak to ODNI was supposed to solve this, and it's not by the looks of it. No, we got no volume again.
No volume again.
I heard the crackling when you came on, but we've got no volume. Dang it. I don't know what to tell you. We had it very, very briefly. All right, we'll let Mike bounce back in again. Yeah. So
my fear is when I look at what happened after 9/11, we got the Patriot Act. My fear is the setup with that's gone on with Palantir is we are headed towards a security state. And if we look at what they've done in Europe, you are looking at Gestapo tactics in Europe right now with the police alone.
100%. All right, this like I can hear you now, Mike.
Oh, thank goodness. How about now? Good.
Appreciate it. So ODNI doesn't seem to be doing what it was intended to.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Khalid was spot on about Tulsi, and then look, Kash Patel used to work for JSOC. He was a JSOC civilian, And his focus, I know, because I could tell how he's mission oriented. It's on counterterrorism. And so when you have somebody who's counterterrorism focused, and then you have Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard's a personal friend of mine. When Tulsi's being diverted for these political manifestations that she has to track down and run down, I just had a conversation with an FBI agent last week, Chris Piota, on my podcast, 25-year FBI agent, and several other FBI agents trying to get an understanding of this. They all tell me they're being pulled for all of these political issues. And so I've always seen the government and the military, depending on what was going on, reshift their focus, right? It happens a lot. And so it's like getting a commander as a special forces team sergeant who comes in, he wants to assert his position and dominance. And so he changes the priorities and focus. But that's happening more aggressively than we ever seen. You have FBI agents whose focus is counterterrorism walking the streets of Washington, D.C. on passive patrols, presence patrols. And I'm like, one, we don't have the capability in the first place. When you have 17 organizations in the IC, the intelligence community, and a lot of that is, I don't know, it's a lot duplicating efforts, but now seemingly there's no specific focus on counterterrorism. I'm afraid that it's like the perfect recipe for disaster, where, you know, the FBI perspective on 9/11 is they dropped the ball. The CIA perspective is they dropped the ball, and the FBI's perspective is, you know, the CIA should have been ahead of it because it was an international focus, and so they blame each other. Well, when nobody's focused with their eye on the ball, that's what happens, and then it presents this loophole that you can run a semi-truck through. And so I'm in fear that our country is utterly focused on politics, right? Redemption. It's the redemption tour. And look, I like the Trump administration for a lot of its policies, especially domestically, but you can never take your eye off of the most significant threat we've ever faced in history, which is the jihadist movement, which has existed since the beginning of the Prophet Muhammad, right? So the writing of the Quran. And so I want to specifically educate people that threat, just because we're in a lull, has never gone away. In fact, the way they think about it, and I always quote the True Believer, which is an amazing quote, is while we're sleeping, while we're not thinking about it, they're training. And not only are they training, they're training and they're training the trainer. And those trainers are force multiplying, and it is stronger than it's ever been in human history. So, you know, the Crusades lasted hundreds of years. And I'm not saying this was a crusade, by the way. I'm saying what this is the jihadists getting the opportunity and the lack of our attention and growing and amplifying. It's almost like the Biden administration literally gave them turnkey and an enabling opportunity to build up their forces. And it's scary. And what we're scratching the surface on, many of the things that Khalid talks about, I imagine there are parts of it that are classified, right? There are parts of it that were close assets, or where we talk vaguely about certain things.
Oh, we just
Mike.
Not sure what's going on there. Give him a minute to try and get back on. It's unfortunate. He was on a roll there as well.
No, he was hitting the right points.
There we go. You bounced out back in.
The NSA is, they know they're listening, man. They're going off they're prompting keywords. It's keywords.
That's actually it's funny, but it's not funny at the same time.
Denial of service. I just saw an F-16 fly over. They know what's going on.
So let me pull up the next stage of the simulated attack and get Mike back on stage here. Okay, so we've gone through 0800. Now we're at 0900. Schools, malls, sarin disperses, symptoms, convulsions, respiratory failure, hit students and shoppers. First responders, Buffalo PD, AMR, EMS, deploy to initial sites, tying up 50% of local resources. Media alerts begin. Social media floods with videos. Airport security at Buffalo remains normal, but on alert. National, similar attacks in other tier 2 cities like perhaps Omaha, Fresno, reported, stretching FBI DHS monitoring. I'm going to hit the 10 o'clock one as well and then go to Khalid and then back to Mike. So at 10 o'clock, major roads, I-90, New York 33, Buffalo Niagara International Airport, ISIS cells, now disguised as first responders, using stolen uniforms, vehicles from past thefts, set up fake checkpoints. They lure fleeing vehicles, mimicking Israel's 10-7 tactics. Well, that was actually Hamas tactics on 10-7, slaughtering occupants, estimated 200 to 500 additional deaths. AQ cells, estimated 10 to 15 members, exploit responder distraction, breaching Buffalo Airport perimeter. Security protocols are overwhelmed. TSA checkpoint partially unmanned. They hijacked 2 to 3 grounded planes, Delta, Southwest, for example, out of Buffalo, amid the chaos, part of a nationwide 12 to 15 hijacks. So walk us through the next 2 hours of this attack, Khalid.
You asking me?
Yep.
All right. Look, when you hit schools, and this has happened in Pakistan, so we've seen it. When you hit a school, you automatically activate the parents, and parents will rush towards the school. And once they rush towards the school, if you've got snipers sitting around, if you've got attackers sitting on the route to the school, they just open fire on vehicles, or they wait till you get there. And once you've gotten there, they open fire on you there. Because someone mentioned to me, we were talking about how they would get the vehicles. He said, you can buy them in auction.
Yep.
It looks just like the actual ambulances, just like the actual police cars, and you can buy them in auction. And that they're going to run towards that vehicle, and as they run towards that vehicle, someone clacks that thing off. There's another 100, 200 dead right there. The panic that will create, the problem is once that panic is created, you forget logic. You are operating from a fear perspective. And once fear controls you, it's a field day for them. No matter what you try and do, like if you were to hit a shopping mall, if as a terrorist, I've put debt cord around all the doors, and we start firing from the second floor and people rush towards that door. Once the first person hits that door, all the exits and entry points are gone. They collapse and there's no rescue. You've seized the whole the shopping center. Same thing exists with your office buildings. The thing you have to understand is what happens inside is what's going to dictate what happens outside. Before your first responders even move, that's going to dictate, because an alert's going to go out. This school's been attacked. This building's been attacked. This happened. Because as long as you have social media running, people are going to start tweeting. And once the tweets start, the roads fill.
So my question for you, I don't recall if you've been on when we've covered this, but I'd love to hear your insight. Any advice for our audience on how they can potentially determine whether a first responder is legit or an imposter?
Yeah, we had talked about this, but I specifically had mentioned that it's about, we call it behavioral dynamics, but it's about the behavior of the first responder, because the idea that hands is the only focus, it's ridiculous, because hands is only a part of the story. The other part of it is demeanor. If you have somebody who looks like a law enforcement officer, but their demeanor tells you otherwise, then you should question that. And then you should be suspect of that. And then you should have a plan to enact some method of violence or breaking contact from that circumstance. What I look at is, obviously, if you live in a community like mine, I live in a town of 17,000. Now it's nearly co-located with a city and a metropolitan area of 1.2 mil, but it's relatively small. Utah is very low on the population scale, and it's sparse. if you're in New York City, you know what the transit police officers look like. You know the difference between transit police and NYPD, right? You know the difference between NYPD and ICE. Again, I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again for anybody who's tuning in. The concern I have is when you look at insurgent operations, you always assume that the bad guys are in civilians, right? You never assume they're in uniform. Everybody assumes that the uniform are the good guys. The problem that we have now is with ICE conducting operations with no standard operating procedure for their uniform. I just saw a video the other day where they did this roll up in Home Depot. It was kind of funny. They used a Penske truck and then they rolled it up and they, the Trojan horse. When they did that, there was probably a dozen variations of uniforms. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not a uniform, used to call them uniform Nazis. I'm not that guy. When I was a sergeant major, I couldn't even quote you one line from 670-1, uniform dress and appearance, because I didn't care. For coming from somebody who had his sideburns measured with a ruler by my company sergeant major in 3rd group, where I'm like, this disgusts me. But I do think there are justified reasons outside of force protection and protecting your identity that you should have standard uniforms to delineate friend from foe. And so I wouldn't take any chances. One of the main ways that you identify law enforcement from a insurgent is weapon systems. Most departments issue blanket weapon systems, the Glock 17 with an RMR and a Safariland ALS holster on a black battle belt. You see a dude rolling up with a reconfigured AK-74 with a red dot. Yeah, probably not what law enforcement is going to utilize, right? M4s, universally, they're going to use red dots, typically not even variable magnification, but red dots. You see a guy running with an M4 with a sexy 1x8 with a suppressor, and he's got a buckle of, a ski mask on, probably something you should pay attention to. And again, these guys now can fit the part. They could buy everything off auctions, like Khalid said. They can go on eBay and buy the exact uniforms that these guys would wear. In fact, I was surprised how easy it was for me to go into a police military uniform store and buy some police kit, because I did a training venue in I taught California Highway Patrol, and I wanted to utilize some of the kit they were using. And I told my buddy, I want to buy a patrol belt that a police officer uses that's shiny and black. I walked in, showed my ID, and was able to buy whatever I wanted. And I was like taken back by that. I was like, well, that was easy. So imagine if you have 3, 4, 5 years in country in America on Facebook Marketplace, what you're able to attain, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy breezy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I'm going to move on to the next 2 hours here. So keep in mind, the airport's already been, at this particular point, it's been exploited, and they've managed to steal some planes. So now we're at 11 a.m. Buffalo Airport, downtown Buffalo City Hall, KeyBank Center, other high rises, hijacked planes take off from Buffalo. 2 crash into downtown buildings, one into Buffalo City Hall, killing approximately 1,500, another into KeyBank Center, killing approximately 2,000. One diverted, shot down by NORAD. Post 9/11 protocols activate. 80% nationwide success rate in crashes for maximum impact. Ground fighting at airport. AQ holds terminal briefly, killing 100 to 200. Local hospitals. ECMC surge with victims. ECMC at capacity with 1,000 plus incoming. 12 noon till 1 p.m. Erie County Medical Center. ISIS cells converge on ECMC, the level 1 trauma center disguised as military EMS. They storm entrances, kill security staff, 100 to 200 initial deaths, take hostages, approximately 500 patients and staff. Broadcast begins via hacked hospital systems, social media. Torture videos of hostages to instill terror. Barricades set, sarin threats announced, National Guard alerted, but delayed by multi-city attacks. So I just want to add one thing before both of you comment on this. Somebody made a point, I think it was in our signal chat and said, how about all of the foreign nationals who've been recruited to be doctors and nurses? What connections do they potentially have to the bad guys in these types of scenarios? But Mike, I'm going to let you pick it up first, then to you, Khalid, on this escalation. Now we've got planes flying into buildings downtown Buffalo. We've got the medical centers not only overwhelmed, it's now been taken as, you know, the HQ for these guys. What does this 2-hour period of time look like to you?
Well, this is in the window of just the mobilization of these special response teams, these tactical teams. I mean, if you look at the military example, at a minimum, if you're on the pager, you're not getting out the gate on the plane until 18 hours in. So imagine you're in a situation where you don't have enough tactical forces to actually respond to all the chaos. And now, instead of triaging a medical mass casualty, you're triaging who's going to get tactical support and who's just going to die, right? Yeah. And my biggest fear with this phase of the operation that we're definitely not prepared for is, yeah, active shooter protocol, it's a thing. But what about a barricaded shooter and a barricaded cell? Like, we saw what happened in Uvalde. I was very vocal on this, and it disgusts me to this day. But when the first arriving officers arrived at the school, there was one or two officers that I will give credit to that were pushing the momentum. The elements, the principles of CQB are speed, surprise, and violence of action. They were basically held up in a hallway where they wanted to follow the shots. They heard the shots. They wanted to go into that classroom, but they basically made at the decision point, at the crossroads, literally at the hallway, decided we were going to turn this into a containment circumstance. The problem with a containment circumstance in terrorism is everybody dies. The plan is everybody dies. If you stop the law and you say, I'm not equipped to handle this because I'm a patrol officer and I have an entire shift with me, 6 officers on a shift on average, and we all converge and we all arrive. Some have pistols, some have carbines, and they decide, okay, we can't handle this circumstance. And they lock the doors, they barricade themselves in a hospital. Well, then you're going to have, on top of the mass casualty that was already created, there's going to be more people that die, that are going to be on media, that are going to be part of the propaganda. And the plan from the onset is death. If they don't realize that, they're not going to take that extra step like those 2 officers wanted to do, where everybody else said, no, we got to wait on SWAT. Well, good luck with that, especially if you have, let's just say, 3 different target sets. You think you're going to wait on FBI HRT? There are 4, I believe, squadrons. They have support squadrons, but 4 active Sabre squadrons and FBI HRT. You're going to have to activate the military. And good luck with that, because the protocol for that is going to be an 18-hour minimum turnaround plus transportation. It is going to be over by then. Everybody will be dead. So if you're a law enforcement officer, and this is what I'll say because I've identified lots of problems, course of action development, wargaming. Get Khalid in a room, wargame the hell out of every potential consideration for what happens and what the bad guys do. We play red cell, whatever you want to call it, bad guy, good guy. When you're playing this, you're identifying the gaps. And then obviously you're not going to be able to fill them all. You prioritize the top 3 priorities. And in fact, this exact scenario, which would be phase 3, would be one of the significant priorities on how we're going to handle this. You create a comms plan, you create a contingency plan, you create a crisis action plan, a tactical plan. At least then you have a modeled plan of action versus when you turn around, you're like, does anybody have an idea? And then there's no ideas, right? You need to be very deliberate about this. And we call it military decision-making process, MDMP. But it's course of action development. You need to war game this, figure out your mistakes and the gaps, and fill them with the top 3 priorities at a minimum. And I'm afraid this phase is going to be the most crucial, because after this, it's all downhill from there.
Add this to your thoughts, Mike. So we did a special going back into the 1970s on this huge number of break-ins and thefts at National Guard armories around the country. most of our National Guard armories are in such a state of disrepair, they don't even have security on many of them. So here's some things that have been stolen in recent years. It's interesting because I looked at the dollar figure on a couple of them. One of them said there were 3 in Tennessee recently, and one of them said that the value of the item stolen was $3,000. And I thought, well, that's not very much. And then I kept reading. It was $3,000 worth of uniforms. Yeah. And then another location in California, they stole 3 Humvees, one of which was armored, 2 of which weren't. So you not only have now the bad guys posing as first responders, they're posing as the National Guard as well. So imagine people are scrambling to get any little piece of information that they can, and they hear that the feds have activated the National Guard. And they don't know what you know, Mike. They think, oh, thank God the National Guard's here, when they're still 18 hours away, but the bad guy dressed up looks like National Guard. There's my safety point.
Well, and that's a good point, because, you know, part of this is everybody in this circumstance potentially would think that they could just send as many soldiers and whatever they got at the problem. This is a very specific surgical action in the military. Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 main focus is not counterterrorism, but hostage rescue. And it becomes, it's a conglomerate, right? Because where there is hostages to be rescued, there's terrorists to be killed or captured, mostly killed. When you go into that situation and circumstance, the amount of effort, the amount of training, the amount of equipment, the amount of assets, the amount of support personnel and enablers that are allowing these guys to be the tip of the spear is so much. It's so invested. Well, guess what? If you have a local National Guard unit and you're like, they're going to save the day, they're going to get more people killed, because you're going to have a 22-year-old private with an M9 Beretta pistol and a blank adapter on the end of his N4 that he has to remove, that he doesn't know how to remove. So there are only specific assets that can handle these type of problems. And I'm afraid, when we get to the end of this, I'll make a recommendation for civilians and what they could do as individuals, but you're not going to be able to hastily put something together to address this, because it will end very poorly. And it's actually a really unsettling situation, how you're breaking it down by phase, because what you've noticed in scale is the number of casualties. As it proceeds, the casualties increase. And if you get to the end of this, it's not looking good.
2 quick things before you go, Khalid. Mike, just out of curiosity, I'm not being funny either. Did you say M9 on purpose instead of M17 or M18 because of the recent debacle with the P320s?
Yeah, that and mostly the National Guard, they're the last to get the equipment. And a lot of those organizations are still running the Beretta M9, which by the way, as an 18 Bravo, is my first job in SF, a Special Forces weapons guy, spend more time repairing M9 Berettas than any other weapon in the inventory because of the locking block. It's a fail point on the Beretta M9, and it's mostly what they have in their armories. And I mean, it would take an act of Congress for them just to tap into an ammo supply point, their ASP on their base. They might have the guns, but to connect all the dots, it's going to be a miracle. And by then, I mean, if you think Delta Force is going to come and rescue, good luck with that. There's other priorities that they're going to be focused on. There's not enough tactical units in the world. And the answer will be kind of similar to like this Idaho shooting, where it's like, hey, civilians, if you're on the hilltop and you see these guys, engage them. It's like, what? I mean, it's insane, but this could be one of those circumstances where they say, hey, we had to prioritize targets, and unfortunately, we didn't have enough assets, so everybody in the hospital died.
Yeah. So when you were mentioning this stuff, as far as basically you're looking at ad hoc processes, nothing's been defined, optimized. I mean, I've been in business development my entire career. So while Khalid's speaking, I'm actually going to dig up a slide from one of my presentations I've used for years that steps you through the 5 levels of processes. Then I'll have you quickly speak to it, because it directly applies to exactly what you mentioned with these guys showing up going, hey, you got a plan? That's ad hoc Superman stuff, right? So Khalid, speak to this next 2-hour window that we're in now.
Look, you've created the havoc. You've blocked the roads. Your police is outgunned. They are outgunned. They are outmanned. That game is over, because you, like Mike was saying, you've trained for active shooter. You've not trained for swarm tactics, and this is a swarm tactic. They are going to hit 1 location, 2 location, 3 locations, and then they're going to move to the hospital and they're going to control that hospital. That becomes the base, which means you're going to have snipers sitting up on the roof that'll be taking target practice on any first responder that comes. They will have ambulances that are loaded up with explosives. So if someone gets too close, they detonate the ambulance, clear that area. You've got hostages inside that you're using for propaganda. The problem with explaining this out, and Mike's right. I mean, I've done that. I was on the phone. I'm not gonna name the police department that I was on the phone with. They called me up and they said, "Listen, explain to us how this will work." And I did exactly what Chris is doing right now. Broke it down by the hour. The guy literally pin drop silence for 15 minutes. He couldn't figure out what I was talking about. He was like, "Are you kidding me? This is what we're looking at?" I said, "This is only the tip. This is only the tip. You are talking 12 to 18 hours before any help can come. Your police is outmanned. Your National Guard is outmanned. Delta's not going to come. SEAL teams aren't going to come. And if they do, they're going to pick targets on where they go. And their first target is going to be airports, not hospitals, because they're not going to want airplanes being taking off. And even if an airplane takes off, how does President Trump give the order to an F-16 to shoot down a passenger plane? The sheer level of moral and ethical problems that develop when you're not thinking this thing out, you have not thought about what can happen. We've seen it here. I mean, again, I come back to Pakistan. I say, look, we have had a hotel blown to smithereens. The Marriott Hotel in Islamabad, they brought in a dump truck, water-drawn dump truck, rolled it into the gate, detonated it, took the entire hospital, took the entire hotel down. They went after the counterterrorism department in Karachi with the same water truck, rolled it right up, loaded with explosives. At the time, I lived 10 kilometers away from the headquarters. My windows shook. That's how strong the explosion was. I mean, literally, my windows shook when that detonated. We had a school attack here in Pakistan. They gathered all the kids into the auditorium and just started executing. Not even hesitate. Boom, 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 boom. One by one. America is not ready for what is coming. And this whole series we've been talking about this. That please take this seriously. Please take this seriously, because your law enforcement is not ready for this. They're not trained up for it. Your civilians are not trained up for it. The only people trained up for this are your GWAT vets. And getting them activated, getting them on base, getting them moving is 12 to 18 hours. That's after President Trump gives the order that the military can be deployed in the United States.
No, not to be a stick in the mud, but I'd be surprised if it even happened that fast, to be honest with you, knowing the way our things move at the speed of glaciers. But I'm not going to read through all this, but Mike, you can hit on any of this you want. So if you're at the bottom, you're developing processes, standard operating procedures, that nothing, if it's not organized, it's referred to as being ad hoc. They're heroic. Somebody puts on a Superman cape and makes it happen, but the performance is not repeatable or predictable. You move up to the next level, managed processes. You have some organized processes, performance is somewhat repeatable, and you maybe have a department or team focus. You move up to the next level to defined. All processes are documented and defined, and they've also been vetted. They know that they actually work. Next level up, quantitatively managed means performance is predictable. Target, standards, and measures used are immediately identify anything that falls outside their parameters. And then you get into optimized processes, this continuous process improvement, incremental innovation. Common causes of variation are quickly identified and improved, basically best in class. And that's basically what Mike's describing, right? With Delta team, their SOPs are best in class. You know, FBI HRT team, best in class. But the National Guard who shows up that don't have a plan relies on somebody with a Superman cape, if I'm understanding you correctly, Mike.
Yeah, I think the point of that is just the process, right? I think there's a plan that needs to be enacted. I actually just thought about it when you were saying that. I was like, Northcom, for example, has assets. Now, their assets aren't activated and involved like assets overseas, like other command theaters. Central Command, for example, is very active. They have an active Tactical Operations Center that runs 24/7. When I was in Africa, and Algeria had a hostage rescue situation where Al Qaeda, Islamic Maghreb, took over allegedly the Marlboro Man took over an oil refinery, and when that happened, we were activated. A couple members of Delta, me and a couple of my guys, loaded up a couple Hilux trucks with rucks, our weapons, our nods, because in Ghadames in western Libya, right across the border, we could have did a desert long-range movement to the oil refinery. We had presented PowerPoint presentations to get tactical approval of this process. But the point is, we were prepared. When we called back to AFRICOM, it was SOC Africa, right? So AFRICOM have no high expectations. It's big army, big military, but they command the theater, a lot of garrison movements and logistics. I called SOCAF thinking, hey, this is going to be an important operation. We need to talk to Intel. We need to get ISR planes up. I called them, and staff duty answered the phone. This is probably 2 a.m. And I said, hey, this is Master Sergeant Glover. I'm in the country of Libya. We just got early warning notice that this is going down. I need to start preempting the situation. And they contacted me and they said, who is this? I said, it's Master Sergeant Mike Glover. I'm in Libya with Team Libya, which is my identifier. And he said, oh, Master Sergeant, we don't run a talk. Everybody's asleep. We're in Germany in Stuttgart. We don't have anybody available. I'm like, you don't have active ISR? You don't have comms up? You don't have anything? No. We don't run an active talk. I'm like, okay. So then I talked to my Delta Force counterpart, Jim. And I'm like, Jim, they don't have any assets. And so he's like, I'll call back to JSOC. And we got things rolling. Northcom has the ability to stand up a crisis response force that's on call to be able to react on the continent. Now, if it was me and I was the president for a day, I would make Delta, Dev, Ranger Regiment, and USAFIC, specifically the counterterrorism elements of Special Forces Command, I would put them on notice. I'd give them a warning order. I would say, hey guys, look, this is a potential. The same aircraft we use for bugging out for international, we need to use the same green ramps, the same C-17s to be able to bug out to do domestic hits. And guess what? We're going to go to Camp McCall. We're going to set up a mock-up of a hospital. In fact, we're going to go do a rural urban training operation, which is called a RUT. I've done several of those. And we're going to fly into Memphis, Tennessee, and we're going to hit a hospital. That's what I would be staging for, because I believe in this circumstance with this many casualties, the only people who are going to be able to affect a better outcome, not a positive outcome, a better outcome, is going to be Special Operations Command and the tip of the spear. By the time they get there, it's likely too late, but at least they'll be able to get on target and be competent. My fear is, based on all the chaos that we're talking about, you get a patrol officer that says, hey, let's get our stuff together. These guys aren't even trained in basic shoot, move, communicate. They don't know small unit tactics, and it's not their fault. They're just not trained on it. So how the hell we're not having a national conversation of why the military needs to be doing crosstalks with patrol officers and academies to teach them how to set a support by fire position, an assault, and a flanking maneuver, just basics of movement. They don't know how to do individual movement techniques, which 17-year-olds, me, at Fort Benning, Georgia, learn how to do. I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. The other guy comes beyond me and bounds 3 to 5 second rushes. They don't even know how to do that. If they don't know that as a basic understanding, we're screwed. And we're screwed in this no matter what, but we could grossly reduce the overwhelming amount of casualties by at least pre-staging, planning, and having a contingency plan.
Yeah, nothing good there at all. So let me jump into the next 2 hour block, and I'll go to you first, Khalid, and then back to Mike. So it's now 1 p.m. in the afternoon. Citywide power grid networks, public awareness peaks via CNN, Fox Alerts, X, of course. Fear spreads. Enemies initiate cyber/physical attacks on critical systems. Buffalo power grid flickers. National grid outages in 30% of cities. Cell and landline networks are jammed. Spectrum Verizon disruptions. Internet spotty, hindering coordination. Local curfew rumors start. 2 p.m. local time. ECMC's, the Tier 1 Trauma Center, checkpoints and airport. FBI SWAT arrives at ECMC siege. Negotiations fail as ISIS demands U.S. withdrawal from Middle East. Additional shootings at checkpoints. Total Buffalo deaths approximately 4,000 now. Airport shut down. Flights grounded nationwide. I'm actually going to hit the next hour as well. So at 1500 or 3 p.m. local, downtown East Side, soft targets power fully out in downtown East Side. Looting begins in chaos. Disguised ISIS imposters ambush remaining responders at soft target sites, killing an additional 50 to 100 firefighters and EMS. So this simulation based on intelligence is not getting any prettier, Khalid.
No, it was never pretty to begin with. That was the whole intent of bringing this out, making it public, because if you had started preparing 4 months ago when we started talking about this, or 5 months ago when we started talking about this situation would not be where we are right now. If you start now, and let's say from Thanksgiving until Ramadan, that's the window for the attack. Let's just assume that's the window for the attack. You don't have enough time to get ready. You don't have enough time to weapon up. You don't have enough time for training. You don't have enough time to hire resources. You are out of the game. And what will end up happening is this will turn into not just mass casualties, but massive casualties. Because if you think the phone network is not going to go down before the airports are hit, then you're not thinking the way we are. Because once your offices are hit, once your schools are hit, all of a sudden that telephone network is jammed. 911's gone down. 911 has gone down. It is not going to work now. And everyone is on their phone. No calls are getting through anywhere. So you've lost communication completely. Power staying on, power going off is not even a matter anymore, because the communication lines are dead. And all that's going out is social media, and internet will be so clogged because so many people will be sending messages on social media, on text messages, on WhatsApp, on all kinds of different communication platforms that will crash the internet as well. You are literally watching a cascade fall. One attack leads to another leads to another leads to another. And as that cascade falls, by the time you reach evening on day one, you have mass chaos. Looting, for all you know, there may be ISIS cells running around inside the cities and just waiting for the looters to come out and start shooting at them. You may have people going to door to door in neighborhoods shooting.
That's a good point that Khalid brings up, by the way. There is some intelligence saying that there may be a 10-7 type of element to this, where you have, weapons caches, whether they be in storage units, empty homes, or whatever. They grab that. They're dressed up as a first responder, a cop. They knock on your door, you answer the door, and they kill you, just like happened on 10-7. And I want to just remind everybody, this thing kicked off, the simulation kicked off at 0800. We're only at 1300, 3 p.m., and the wheels are already coming off. We have 2 more episodes tonight and tomorrow night and the next night on this Road to 9/11 2.0. But on Monday, we're starting another 12-part series that's going to be on prepping and survival before, during, and after 9/11 2.0. So we're going to get into the meat of stuff there. Mike, walk us through this next 3-hour block here.
From an operational perspective, I want people to understand that, depending on the time of attack, this could be at night, right? If this happens at night, 50% of your capability as an operator, a patrol officer, as a first responder is disabled. One time I taught a SWAT team in California during CT training, and I had them enter the room, which they did strong walling, which is a technique of entering the room. There's points of domination, there's free flow, there's variations depending on the school they come from. They did strong walling, and as they enter the room, they didn't have NVGs. They would use their illuminated white lights at the threshold. They'd enter, they would step into the threshold, illuminate their white light. As they entered, as part of this demo, I used simunitions, and I had NVGs, and I had infrared laser on my sim gun, and I killed 5 of their operators within the first 3 seconds of entry. And what I told them is, I was like, listen, the reality is, if you use white light, you're giving away your position. Yep. And you're actually blinding yourself from your position with 500 lumens of light. The average is about 7 seconds of blinding yourself after that white light goes off at 500 lums. Your cell phone, for example, at 50 lums can positively identify a threat and only last and blind you for about 2 seconds. So I said the ideology, the commercial space of visible lights is that more lums means better. It actually is the complete opposite. More lums, you need the appropriate lums to identify the threat. And there are cases where patrol officers have to mitigate risk, and blinding the perpetrator is important. But for a tactical element, you're basically giving yourself away. Well, 99% of all tactical units in America don't use NVGs. Imagine a scenario where these guys have NVGs, where they own the night. I've seen, and I've been on hits where we've killed everybody in chest rigs with suicide vests, ready to get their jihad on in the first couple seconds because we initiated the assault. They didn't know we were there, and we had NVGs and infrared lasers. So imagine all this chaos at the same time. You don't have visibility and you're in low light when the enemy has NVGs and lasers. I often war game this idea of like, the veteran is armed and he's potentially going to kill you because he's more capable and he's going to be violent. No, I've seen how Delta Force hits go. I've seen how Special Forces hits go, and it's quiet. You won't even know it hits you because you're in darkness, you have NVGs, and you own the night. And a critical misidentification of all these things that we're talking about is the enemy, just like domestically, civilians are more capable of getting more capable, more so than in human history because of the opportunities and the choices that afford us. The enemy has that opportunity just as much, if not more, because they trained in Afghanistan. They got all the training and all the baseline requirements. And then they come here. They might even got battlefield experience. And now they come here as OGs with all the experience, and they take advantage of the gluttony and the abundance that we have in this country. That's where rubber hits the road because we think, oh shit, we get our gun on, the cars start arriving, and everybody dies in the first couple of seconds because they don't know what hits them. They don't know the capability they're going against.
Yeah, that's amazing input, Mike. Just I'll quickly say that Philip DePino, the guy who owns WAFT, where our families train, has some incredible training with EDC flashlight, just so much as interrupting somebody's OODA loop and making them decide, oh, I don't have the element of surprise anymore. I think I'll go attack somebody else. It's pretty interesting to watch. And it's also interesting that, you know, these are the UTM rounds that Mike's referring to. So you modify a regular weapon. So it's the same trigger, it's the same form factor, but they shoot a little paintball out of these at 400 plus feet per second. But as you can see, they have a primer in them. So the auditory report is identical to what the weapon would be normally. And it's pretty intense when you train with these. I've only had the opportunity to do it a couple of times, but Mike will tell you, it'll make your heart rate elevate really, really quickly. So let's move on to the next chunk of this scenario here. And I'm going to hit 4 hours here just because, I mean, we're well down the road. So we started at 0800, it's 1600 now, 4 p.m. in the afternoon. ECMC broadcast intensify, 20 to 50 hostages executed on video. Federal declaration of emergency, New York governor activates National Guard, arrival in 2 hours. At 1700, 5 p.m., airport citywide. Guard units secure airport remnants. Cleanup begins amid gunfire. Infrastructure, data networks down. ATM and banks fail. At 1800, 6 p.m., checkpoints, ECMC, the hospital. Sunset, low visibility aids snipers at checkpoints. ECMC siege holds. Hostages rationed food and water, which, by the way, at the very top here at 1600, I just want to make sure I caught it. 20 to 50 hostages executed on video, by the way. 1900, which is 7 p.m. citywide. Media blackout attempted, but leaks via X, Telegram, etc. National death toll reported at tens of thousands. Khalid, step us through this 4-hour stretch.
This is the 4 hours where you find out exactly how many people are just going to be done. It's like Mike was saying, that you've got to make decisions, and your first priority as a security force is going to be your airports, because an airplane if your Al-Qaeda terrorist is trained in flying a plane, it doesn't matter if you shut down the airports. He's going to take that plane up. Those planes are fueled. They were ready to go before the attack started. It's not like you lock them up and you can't get them off the ground. They will get them off the ground and they'll hit their targets. The problem becomes that you are so hampered that by the time any response starts, they've already achieved their goal. They have broadcast the propaganda. They have hit Middle America. They have spread across the world that we have hit the U.S. And the recovery from this is going to take years. This is you are talking about PTSD across an entire country. This is not going to be citywide. This is going to be PTSD across the entire country, because anyone who's watching these videos, anyone who's watching these broadcasts, mentally they're going, we could be next. And that we could be next will instill so much fear that it will change the way you behave. And the problem that we've got is if you're looking for solutions, there are none, because you're 2 years behind schedule already. You're 5 months behind schedule already. The US government is still denying the fact that this is even possible. And as long as the government says this isn't possible, how do I motivate yourself? How do we motivate your citizens? Because even the citizens are going to say, well, if I've got a police force, I've got a National Guard, I've got a military. Do you understand what it takes to activate a military? What the president has to do to activate the military so they can come onto US streets? This is not Mumbai itself. Mumbai itself, at the end of Mumbai, it was Indian Army commandos that helicoptered onto the roof of the Taj Hotel and descended slowly, engaging on every floor by floor, coming down. Think about clearing a hospital. All the rooms, all the closets, all the storage areas where a terrorist could hide, where an explosive could be placed. You are talking about things that the normal guy isn't even thinking about. Mike's done it. I'm sure Mike's cleared hospital wings before. And he can attest to the fact that when you are talking about clearing an airport or a hospital, the nooks and crannies that you've got to look in, it's not a couple hours. This is a full day task. It will start at night and it will run through until the next night. And you'll still be going, did we get everybody?
So before Mike walks us through the next 4 hours, I'll just say this much. You will have your regular law enforcement officers have been programmed to what's called the rule of +1. So they pull somebody over for speeding. They're contacting the driver. They can't see if there's someone in the back or the passenger seat. They automatically work off the premise that there's one more person. So when they're clearing a home, for example, they may think the home is empty, but as they're going through it, they're thinking there's always one more. The rule of +1, that completely goes out the window in this scenario. Now you're looking at the rule of +25 or worse. So Mike, your thoughts?
Like I said before, these are swarm attacks.
Yeah.
You've got cells of 10, 7, 5 that are moving into every target. You're not playing with one guy. And you don't know if there's a guy sitting outside just waiting for you to come out and they take a shot at you there.
Yeah, it's crazy. Mike, walk us through your thoughts over the next 4-hour period here.
Well, something comes to mind is the expectation of contact. Like there's an expectation if you're in the military, especially in special operations, doing DA raids, that you're going to make contact. There's raids that I've heard of. I've never been on one of these raids where guys like medics, 18 Deltas, PJs have hooked up IV lines because they expect that the first group, the troop, the squad is going to be casualties. So we're already pre-rigged with an expectation that we're going to be casualties. I've been on hits before where there was an expectation that potentially 50% of the force was going to be casualties. One of my trips with just one troop, one SF company, so 6 teams divided into two troops. I think we had 15 Purple Hearts in just that trip. That was a 4-month run. So like there is an expectation in the military operations that you're going to be in a gunfight and you're going to make contact. Officer-involved shootings don't include that mindset. In fact, most of officer-involved shootings are deliberate acts. Stop, drop your gun, pop, because he presents himself. He was an imminent threat that became an immediate threat. Hey, you need to drop the gun, boom, and then breaks the shot. But it's not often you get into gunfights. You know, the reason SWAT operations for high-risk warrants are effective is because the veracity of speed, surprise, and violence of action. You throw a 2-banger into a room, and they know you're coming in. It's like, oh, I don't want to take this risk. So 99.99997% of these kind of raids don't involve a gunfight. Well, what happens when the expectation is you're a patrol officer, you've never been in a gunfight, you don't know how to shoot, move, communicate, and you get in a stack ready to go to war. The example of that is I know a patrol officer who's now SWAT in Las Vegas that was off duty, who ran and became one of the guys in the stack that entered the room in the Mandalay Bay. And I asked him about his psychology because he did have friends that were there that were SWAT operators. One of the guys was in cowboy boots in the casino, threw his boots off, ran to his vehicle, got his carbine, and went to work. He had an explosive charge in his cargo pocket, right? All of this was willy-nilly thrown together. And he said, it's the scariest moment of my life. I've done that same thing 100+ times, right? So again, it's a shift in mindset, and then it's an understanding of capability. We are not capable. The other component to this in this 4-hour block is paranoia. I've taken civilians, goat herders, like sheep herders, into combat veterans, right? The whole myriad of the full spectrum of by, with, and through. When you look at this particular situation, whenever we do a culmination exercise, maybe their first combat operation, there was paranoia, right? It's part of fight or flight. It's part of the cortisol and the norepinephrine and the adrenaline that's surging through their body because they've never been in that situation before. They're conditioned for stress, but not for combat. It's two different things, right? You could be conditioned for stress and be more likely to be successful in combat, but you don't know until you know. Well, what happens when the entire region is paranoid? What happens when patrol officers for the first time are getting on a gun truck and they're driving down the city street and they see people running around and they think they're bad guys? Well, what I've seen happen with the Iraqis and Afghanis and other countries is what's called a death blossom. They take one round, they think the entire city is killing them, and they death blossom. And I've had to call on the radio. I've had to tell people to stop shooting, cease fire. I've even grabbed barrels of guns. I had one time where I was riding TC shotgun, and the driver dropped the GMV window. This is before we were even in armored vehicles. He dropped the window and was shooting his Glock pistol, his Glock 19, just doing this. And I'm like, what are you doing? What are you shooting at? He goes, well, everybody else is shooting. That's a fear response. What you're going to run into is that paranoia. And I'm afraid that, like you said in this block, the exploiters, all the people who want to take advantage are going to be running the city streets, taking advantage. And that's scary. Because then you don't know who's who, and everybody's a potential insurgent, right? And then that's where you see a lot of friendly fire, a lot of incidents of civilians getting killed because it's chaos.
Unreal. So we're running long on time, but we're getting close here. We're probably only going to get Buffalo done tonight. We'll try and cover Madison at another point. So let's jump into the next 4 hours here. So at 8 p.m., ECMC police headquarters power partially restored via generators at key sites, police HQ. ISIS at ECMC digs in, wiring sarin to the HVAC system. 9 p.m., airport and soft targets. Airport fully secured, bodies recovered. Quiet at soft targets, survivors evacuated. 10 p.m., ECMC and checkpoints. ECMC negotiations via phone, demands unmet, minor skirmishes at checkpoints. 11 p.m., citywide blackout reinstated by attackers, probable cyber persistence. And I'm going to go to midnight as well. ECMC overnight patrols, guard sets perimeters, National Guard, that should say, around ECMC. So Khalid, walk us through this 5-hour block now at essentially the end of the first day.
Well, I think I hate to say it this way, but I think we're being really hopeful that we'll wrap this up by the end of the day, because a siege like this will carry on for days. The number of people that will be held hostage, the number of demands that will be made, the types of negotiations that will be going on. You'll have the terrorists saying, we want so-and-so released from Gitmo. We want so-and-so military pulled out of such and such country. We want this given to this person. We want this given to this person. That negotiation process will start. And this will not move quick. I mean, we're being really nice by saying that this will be done by midnight. But if you look at
Hold on. So the simulation says that the first day ends at midnight, but it actually goes all the way through till midnight on the third day.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm doing this in big. That's why I'm doing it in big chunks, because
that's my point. Because when you start talking about how power will be restored, casualties are removed, that's not going to happen on the first day. You're going to have detonations. You're going to have entryways blocked off. How are you going to get survivors back out if there are any survivors left? How are you going to get bodies out? I mean, how are you going to clear pathways? The idea of what these people are planning, what these terrorists are planning, they are not expecting to leave anyone alive, including themselves. They will clear everyone from schools, buildings, everywhere. There will be nobody left alive. And when you think from that mentality, there is no day 1, day 2, day 3. This is just an ongoing process. That how long is it going to take for us to get control of that building back?
Yeah, good point. So, Mike, I'm going to accelerate. So take into account what we just covered, and I'm going to cover a pretty decent chunk of time here just to try and get ahead. So 1 o'clock in the morning, citywide. So we're moving into the beginning of day 2. Cyber counterattacks by U.S. NSA begin restoring networks, approximately 60% success probability. You know what? Give me 2 seconds. This is so long that I somehow managed to get out of order on this. Apologies for that. There we go. Okay, so 0100 ECMC hostage videos resumed, 10 to 20 executions. 0200 fatigue hits responders, ECMC minor breaches attempted at ECMC repelled. 0300 citywide quiet hour surveillance drones deployed. 0400 citywide power glitches continue, cell service 50% restored. 0500 ECMC dawn approaches, ISIS reinforces barricades. 0600 citywide morning briefings, federal reinforcements, Delta Force en route. 0700 ECMC hostage releases, teased but false, tension builds. 0800 day 2 begins, siege ongoing, deaths plateau at approximately 5,000. 0900 ECMC Delta Force arrives, sniper overwatch on ECMC national, similar sieges in other cities strain resources. 1000 citywide partial infrastructure recovery, power to 70% of city, media helicopters restricted. 1100 ECMC bomb squad probes ECMC for sarin, 1 device detected remotely. 1200 hostage video demands for prisoner releases at Gitmo. Public protests form outside the perimeter. All right, so that's a 12-hour stretch there, Mike. Just give me your thoughts on how that looks.
Well, I think about Waco, Texas, and I think about the extended amount of time that Waco took. I've interviewed guys from the FBI HRT that were on target. And I think about that timeline because, like Khalid said, the difference here is containment. And when you lock down a building, there is no entry point. There is no entryway. And you need a very specialized unit. And if that specialized unit makes entry and takes fire, if they're not Delta Force, if they're not DevGru, if they're not FBI HRT, they're going to retreat. No SWAT team that I've ever trained domestically has the what's called, I would say, the DUG, deep underground capability to take on something like this. They would need dollies, they would need shields, and they would need to move methodically. And if at any point they did a dynamic assault, let's say they did breaching, explosive breaches, top, down, bottom, all around, then that's when the mass killing begins. Because these guys are going to be deep within this building, contained, locked behind multiple breach points, and they have the tactical advantage. And that's the scary thing, because the nature of the deliberate timeline, more hours means more reinforcement to their position, and they're going to upgrade their position. And so they might be in a situation where they don't have enough rounds for everybody they're going to kill. A basic payload for an infantryman in the military is 7 magazines of 30 rounds each. Double that, maybe they have a backpack like the Mumbai guys with grenades, but they might not have enough rounds for all the guys that they need to kill because they have so many hostages. And when it comes down to it, either they're going to clack off at the end with explosives when entry is made. I just think the point of this is because of the nature of the buildings they're occupying, we've never seen that. And the last time we have was probably Waco. Now, the reason Waco was the way it was is because there was no viable means to gain entry. The way that the ATF tried to gain entry, they lost multiple operators. I think it was potentially six operators that were killed trying to do a ladder infill on what we call the second, we call it B level, but the B, window level where they're trying to make entry. That is going to be similar in nature. Every tactical element that's trying to make entry will get fired upon, and then they will say, well, we can't do that. They're going to try to infiltrate drones, infiltrate, remote vehicles, whatever it may be. It's not going to be enough. The unfortunate thing is the nature of hospitals is all the doors are solid. There's no hollow core doors. It is a industrial commercial building. It's the combination of both. That is going to be a very difficult problem set if they embed themselves deep inside of it. So I think it's going to be more of a hold and contain, and then try to negotiate, and then go through this process that's probably going to fail. And then again, more hostages are going to die.
Yeah.
Unless, again, the caveat is unless Delta or Dev infiltrate and saturate the target set and are viable on target in engaging the bad guys, because they're going to do it at night under nods with infrared lasers.
Just a quick piece, and then I'm going to jump to another 12-hour block for you, Khalid, is that there's some intel out there saying that hospitals, in particular mosques, where only the imam has the key card to get in, are being used as weapons caches. So, and there's already people who potentially infiltrated the staff, whether they're doctors or nurses. So
I know of 3 such hospitals where there are mosques where keycard entry is only with the Muslims and no non-Muslims allowed inside. I mean, that's a weapon store, and the door is built in such a way that it looks like part of the wall. You can't even tell it's a door there.
Sounds like a speakeasy. Okay, so we're on the second day here, September 11th. We started 0800, September 10th, 1300, 1 p.m. citywide. Cyber counterattacks by U.S. NSA begin restoring network 60% probability. 1400, 2 p.m. ECMC, minor explosion at ECMC controlled by ISIS, 50 deaths. 1500, 3 p.m. Nearby buildings, Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, evacuations of nearby buildings. That's interesting. I'm dying to hear your thoughts on why it took that long to evac. 1600 4 p.m. ECMC negotiations via intermediary, no progress. 1700 5 p.m. ECMC sunset thermal imaging used for surveillance. 1800 6 p.m. ECMC food, water, airdrop to hostages, partial success. 1900 7 p.m. ECMC ISIS executes 20 more on broadcast. Outrage spikes. 2000 8 p.m. citywide ECMC blackout hits again. Generators prioritized for ECMC perimeter. 2100 9 p.m. citywide quiet responder rotations. 2200 10 p.m. ECMC drone strike considered but rejected due to sarin risk. 2300 ECMC hostage escaped attempted. 10 freed. 20 killed. Midnight ECMC overnight vigilance intel on ISIS reinforcements, low probability as borders are locked. We're at 1 a.m. Khalid, walk us through that 12-hour block. I'm going to go through like 2 or 3 of these 12-hour blocks to wrap this up.
Okay. The reason you don't clear buildings from the beginning, and I mean what we've seen, you don't want to put more targets in the field. As long as those people are inside the building, they're safe. And you can protect them. But if they come outside, you've put more targets in the field, and you don't know where they're going to go. You don't know what kind of paranoia they're going to create. So you don't immediately get them out of the buildings. You shelter in place, basically, just like you would with an active shooter on campus somewhere. When you start moving forward, as ISIS starts to understand that this siege is starting to wind down, the execution levels are going to increase massively. You are going to see, in place of 20, 50, in place of 50, 100, and the number's just going to go up. And the brutality of the executions, you'll see torture first, and then you'll get an execution, because that mental, that psychological impact they're looking for will be built that way. That, look, we took this old lady, we beat her, we assaulted her, we broke her bones, and then we killed her. And that fear level builds more. The problem that we're looking at is, again, when you have control, like Mike was saying, when you're inside of a hospital and you're deep inside of a hospital, the breach points are very difficult. And an escape attempt of any kind is impossible, because even if you try and get out, you're going to get shot. So no one's going to move. And the problem you end up having is that as time goes on, you are going to lose more and more people. It's what we saw in Mumbai. The longer the siege went on, the more people died. The reason we keep saying that if you start prepping for this, the siege wouldn't be as bad. You'd have your hospitals would be hardened. You'd have security inside of your hospitals. You would have implemented key cards so that certain areas aren't accessible. But where you end up being right now is you are open doors. And it's like literally walking into a restaurant and taking and settling wherever you want to settle. And the fear we have is snipers setting up on top and just trying to take people out.
Yeah, that's legit. So here we are at 1 a.m. in the morning, 0100 ECMC minor gunfire exchange, 0200 ECMC fatigue-related errors, 1 guard injury, 0300 ECMC surveillance confirms sarin setup, 0400 ECMC planning for storming intensifies, 0500 ECMC dawn morale low among hostages, 0600 citywide federal briefing bombing option tabled, civilian cost too high, 0700 ECMC hostage videos resume, 0800 day 3 siege at 48 hours, total deaths in Buffalo now at 6,000. 0900 ECMC storming operation authorized, approximately 70% probability of sarin trigger but no alternatives. Commandos breach ECMC heavy fighting, sarin partially released, contained to sections via HVAC shutdown, killing 500 to 1,000, including some of the attackers. 10 a.m. ECMC hospital secured, ISIS cells neutralized, 20 to 25 dead, hostages freed, approximately 300 survivors. 1100 alternate sites Triage at alternate sites. Sarin decontamination begins. 1,200 citywide infrastructure fully restoring. Power cell at 90%. 1,300 Buffalo. Martial law declared in Buffalo. Curfew enforced. 1,400 soft targets. Cleanup at soft targets. Memorial starts. 1,500 Buffalo Airport. Airport reopens partially for aid flights only. 1,600 National Address by President investigation launches. 1,700 citywide looting suppressed. Guard patrols, National Guard patrols. 1,800 citywide evening comm psychological aid deployed. 1,900 citywide media access restricted. 2,000 citywide full network restoration. 2,100 citywide quiet arrests of suspected accomplices. 2,200 citywide overnight security. 2,300 citywide minor incidents resolved. And so we basically took 3 days to get to the end of this, Mike. Cover that last day and a half that I just stepped us through, and we'll wrap this thing up.
Yeah, the hope is a regional FBI SWAT team has the capability on site to be able to, as a ground force commander, make the decision to do what they have to do, because they have the breaching capability and they have the organic capability internal to that unit to likely affect or impact that target set, which means there'll be a 12-hour in advance to the calamity that you got, where you had on the third day hostages rescued, or the second night, early morning into the third day. I don't think it will take that long, because here's what I know as someone who's been a ground force commander during assaults. If there's mass casualties, they're going to basically turn a deliberate into a TST. What that might look like is, if you're taking off from Fort Bragg, you got a couple hours to get all the intel, and you're coming off the ramp, you're getting in vehicles, and you're moving to the target. Your charges are prepped. You've gotten everything. Hey, guys, we're going to work right when we get there. And that's the hope. But like I said, there's only a few organizations in the world that have even just a breaching capability to penetrate a hospital with all its breaching problems. I'm unfortunately, to local SWAT teams, a sledge and a hooligan are not going to get it done. You need C2, you need high ECT grain explosive charges, and you need dogs, you need drones, you need all the capability, and you need dudes who are willing to put their lives on the line. In my opinion, that is only Delta, Dev, FBI, HRT at the tip of the spear. There are other units that can get it done, but those guys are likely going to be on site first. Again, mass casualties, unfortunate circumstance. But if the one lesson learned in closing would be is all the things that we just did it's called wargaming. It's course of action development. Many of the things that we just talked about and discussed could be taken, and we can go, oh, well, maybe we need to do the coordination, the planning in advance for it.
Imagine that. So we're going to do tonight's conflicted question tomorrow night. We're going to do the audience submitted news stories tomorrow night. Final word to you, Khalid, then final word to Mike, and we can wrap this up.
Look, I'm going to come back with the same thing. The level of complacency that exists in the U.S., that it's September 10th, 2001. You need to break that, because the scenario we just laid out for you is very real. It's very real. And if it hits your city, when it hits your city, you're not going to know what to do. The panic mode, the paranoia that will hit, you're not going to know what to do. And it's good that we laid it out for you this way, because if there are law enforcement watching, if there are intelligence agencies watching, if the government is watching, we've given you a timeline of what the playbook looks like. Now start wargaming it out. Start looking at your own city and going, how do we handle this? How do we handle this? How do we handle this? And start building procedures and understanding how you're going to move through this. Because swarm attacks are things that U.S. police departments aren't trained for. And you've got time. You've got time to put something together. But take our roadmap and work it out.
Okay. Thanks, Khalid. Final word to you, Mike.
That what we just laid out, I want to remind people, is just most likely course of action. It's not most dangerous. There are complexities that make it actually a lot more dangerous, including the airport, like Khalid alluded to. So that is likely just going to be what is going to happen. And if we're not talking about countering that potential threat, we're putting ourselves in harm's way. As a civilian, what you should be thinking about is how do you lock down and fortify your home? How do you barricade? Look, you shouldn't be running around with an AR-15 in this type of situation, free flow CQB, doing single man CQB. That's not what's the expectation. It's you're standing in your threshold, your back is against the wall maybe, and you're ambushing and shooting everybody who comes through your threshold who's willing to take your family's life. That's where you should be, home protecting your loved ones. My fear is all the first responders that are in that area. Where would I be? I would be at home protecting what I love most. Unfortunately, it's not going to be the public. It's going to be those guys' and gals' families.
Rightfully so, as it should be. So if you head over to survivaldispatch.news, sign up for our free Substack, go to today's SITREP, give me 15, 20 minutes, and all of the files that we shared tonight will be there. One final comment to somebody who keeps, coming up with one excuse after another of why the key card systems are secure, so on and so forth. Number one, 56% of hospitals in America have compromised key card systems, number one. Number two, you have networks compromised by state actors like Iran, Volt Typhoon, which is Chinese, North Koreans. There's no scenario here that hasn't already been thought out and pre-planned by the terrorists. They don't need all of the things you're suggesting they need. And when the teams come in, they're going to be physically barricaded, not just a key card pass. It is not a secure system. It's been compromised. And to think otherwise is kind of like the ostrich sticking his head in the sand. We will be back tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern with the 11th installment on the road to 9/11 2.0. Monday, we start the prepping and survival before, during, and after 9/11 2.0. Brand new closing video tonight. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. God bless America.
Bless America.
And enjoy this new video.
They say the flag's just cloth and thread, but it draped my daddy's coffin bed. He bled for it, now they curse his name while burning down what he died to save. I don't bow down, I won't comply. I ain't America.